we are. Hey, Cody. How you going, mate?
Good. How's it going, man?
Very good of you to join us, mate. Thank you so much.
Good. Thanks for having me. Yeah, absolutely.
No,
It was big fan of the channel, so it's an honor to come on and to talk to everybody and talk to you.
Oh, that's good, mate. Thank you. No, I really like. I don't know how I found you or how we got to contact each other. Maybe you joined our Discord. I think you joined our Discord, and then you started posting really cool Rogue Trader pics of your Harlequin army. I think that's how we initially met.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Then I've been jumping in the paint and chat when I can, and because usually every other day I'm painting, and I figured might as well jump in there. That was the reason I joined the Discord, is to
Cool.
join in the paint and chat. And it's been really cool to talk to all the guys there and paint some miniatures. And so I think that's really how we got to know each other a little bit.
Meet each other. Yeah, that's really nice. It's good that you did it, mate, because I'm glad you jumped in and did that, because we found your channel and the nice stuff you present there as well at GM Cody. But a special shout out to Sci-Fi. Now, Sci-Fi I met through the week. He jumped in our paint and chat as well, and he lives all the way in Newcastle. And he asked about the live stream this week, and I said, I'm talking to Cody in Tennessee, and I said it's going to be like really late for you. Because I want to join. I said, okay. So I think it's like 2 a.m. in the morning there in the UK now. So
oh wow,
big shout out for Sci-Fi. Thanks for coming in. Yeah, that's awesome. Really happy to see you. And Chris is here. How you going, mate? Chris is also in the States, and I think Chris is trying to organize a remote game with you, Cody, for Man of War or something, eh?
Yeah. I really want to try out some Man of War, and I'm really interested to try out the remote gaming thing. That's something I've never even thought about doing until I met you guys, and it seems really interesting to do. So I really want to try it out.
Cool.
And Man of War is a game I've always wanted to play and never really had a chance to try out. So yeah, looking forward to that whenever that can happen.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, Chris and it's good for you because you're in the same time zone. I think you're an hour difference, something maybe between Chris and yourself.
Yeah, he's Eastern time and I'm Central time.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So it's good for you guys time-wise to do that. So that's awesome. So I look forward to seeing that game. I'm free this week, Chris says. He's desperate for somebody.
Well, we'll figure something out.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Lonely Hearts Discord group remote play thing or whatever. So yeah, now Chris and Cameron are always looking for people to show and play and give demonstrations on Man of War because it's such a great game.
Yeah,
and I'm glad you guys want to jump in and do that. So I think he did a game with the Grognard, and maybe you jumped in to check out when you were there. I don't know if you were there at all, Cody, but yeah, we were watching that one through the week, and that was really good. Demonstration game again, because the Grognard's got all the stuff, all the Man of War box sets you could ever think of.
Oh, wow.
80 plus miniatures, just I don't think had ever played it or something. Maybe his uncle gave it to him or something like that. So he's sort of rediscovering it, and he's got the entire collection. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. So that's cool, mate. So yeah, let's talk about yourself, Cody, because you have a very cool video on your channel that I watched this week about your origin story, how you got into the hobby.
Yeah.
But for people who probably have never seen your channel or don't know much about you, mate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Cody. I was raised here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm still here in the Nashville area. I was not born here. I was actually born in East Texas, and that's where all my family's from, is from Texas. But I call myself a Tennessean. I grew up here. I still reside here, so I'm a Tennessean. So I will start off before I get into the origin story, which I love a good origin story. That's one reason I really like your channel and the podcast, is I love hearing people's origin stories. So hopefully people like hearing mine. But before I jump into that, I will say that I was a guy that was well primed to fall in love with all this stuff, right? Before I even discovered role-playing games, miniature games, card games, or any of that stuff. So my dad was a big history buff, right? And when I was about 4 years old, we moved into the house that my parents live in still to this day. And my dad, or I guess I was about 3. And then when I turned 4, my sister was about to be born. And he converted one of the bedrooms into his basically man cave, right? It was his study. And he he's a big lover of history, and he's a ferocious reader, right? So he had this just library of books, and he still does. So he converted that room to basically be his library, and he's a carpenter, and that's why I'm a carpenter. And he built this, just wall-to-wall library-like shelving all the way around this room and just filled it with books. And so, but my sister was about to be born when I was 4 years old, and I needed my own room. He realized, I'm going to have my own room now. So he gave up his man cave, his study or whatever, and gave it to me. Well, that had a big impact on me because he left all the books in there, right? And so from a young age, I became really infatuated with all this stuff that was in there. And it was mainly my dad does not read fiction at all. It's all history and facts and knowledge. That's what my dad's always been all about. He's never been a lover of fiction like I am or whatever. But that had a big impact on me because from a young age, I would spend all this time. That was my room filled with all these books. And before I could even read, I would open up all these books about the American Civil War and Napoleon and the Aztecs and the Vikings and the Romans. And I would just look at the pictures and especially the maps. And a lot of those old books, they also had a lot of, I remember specifically some of these like really old books from the 60s and 70s would actually have miniatures in them. They'd have like these dioramas set up in the books with like these miniature like dioramas. And I was actually looking for one of these books because I do have it and I couldn't find it. So needless to say, I became really infatuated with military stuff, military history. And also my grandmother lived in Virginia. So every summer I would go up to Virginia and spend the summer with her. And I have a ton of cousins. I have a big family. And basically all my cousins would come up there. My poor grandmother would load us all up in her big cargo van and drive us around Virginia, which is just loaded with American history, right? So we would go to all these Civil War battlefields, and we go up to Washington, D.C., and we would go to all these, Williamsburg and Jamestown and all these places. I don't know if my cousins enjoyed that stuff so much, but I loved it as a kid, and especially the battlefields. So needless to say, I became really kind of hooked on that military kind of stuff and history and all that from a very, very young age. And on top of that, I was in love with science fiction and fantasy and all that from a very young age. So, I grew up like all of us did, right? Watching Star Wars and Star Trek, but I was also a big fan, and it was kind of unusual for being a little kid, of all these like black and white and, very early science fiction films from the 50s and 60s, like This Island Earth and Forbidden Planet, and shows like Lost in Space and, the original Star Trek, which my parents thought was real strange that a, little kid would want to watch this stuff. But anyways, so, and I grew up with all the 80s films that we all love, right? Like Willow and Legend and Blade Runner. And, the list goes on and on. Dark Crystal and The Labyrinth. So I just loved fantasy. I loved science fiction. And I had a great love of like history and military stuff. So now we get into the origin story. Right. And it's interesting because that origin video I didn't mean to make that video my origin story. And you can notice if you watch the video, I'm actually going to be talking about something else. And I ended up talking about my origin story. But since I've done that, I've actually had started to think about it and had to go back and really piece together my memories. And I made some mistakes in that video. And I think I've pieced together the history sort of. So I was 10 years old. I'm not that old, by the way. I'm only 37. So I was 10 years old. This would have been the fall of 1996. So I would have just turned 10. I was entering the 4th grade. And I didn't have many friends at all back then. I had 2 friends. They were twin brothers, and they lived right across the street from me. And I had known them since the 1st grade. And when I was in the 3rd grade, they had moved across the street from me. And that was the only 2 friends I had in school. And we had a lot in common, comic books and superheroes and all that old science fiction stuff like I was talking about. They loved that too. So they were the 2 friends, the only 2 friends I had, and they were not in my 4th grade class. So I'm stuck in this 4th grade class. I don't know any of these kids. And it must have been really early on in the school year because I can vividly remember not knowing anybody's names or what was going on or anything. And I was a pretty awkward, shy, introverted kid. And, so I'm like sitting there, doing whatever, probably not paying attention because I never was. I think we were doing some kind of like homework or test. Everything was quiet in the classroom. And I saw this more awkward looking kid with frizzy hair. And sorry, Andrew, by the way, because he might be watching this, but he was just a really awkward looking kid back then. He was a little chubby, had really like this fro-ish kind of hair and just, big glasses from what I remember. And he just very, very, very stereotypical, like nerdy kind of awkward kid. But I noticed he was flipping through this magazine. I could just kind of see it. He was maybe like 3 desks up from me. And I was really intrigued by this. I mean, of course, like back then, as we all know, like magazines were kind of a big deal, right? And if you were in school and somebody had a magazine, no matter what it was, you kind of were interested in what is this? But I could see there was just something was going on there, and I had to see what it was. So I got up from my desk and was acting like I was going to go sharpen my pencil. And so I passed by, and he closes the magazine, and I see this cover. Now it's the cover that you had on your on the thumbnail here, which is the 1994 Citadel Miniatures catalog. Now, actually, the funny part is I've talked to Andrew about this, and he claims that he never owned this catalog, never seen it in his life. And so it might not actually have been that catalog. It might have been a different one, but that's how I remember it. So I'm going to tell it the way I remember it. So either way, it had to have been between 1994 and 1996. It was one of those Citadel Miniatures catalogs. And he closes the cover, and I see this World Eaters Space Marine on it. And it just blew my mind, like I had never seen imagery like this in my life anywhere, right up to this point. And so I was just like, yo, man, like, I'm not exactly what the words are, but, I was like, what is this? What is going on here? He's like, oh, and he was really excited. I remember that part. He's like really excited. And he starts flipping through the magazine. He's just going 100 miles an hour. And it's like in the middle of class too, like we're supposed to be doing homework or whatever. He's like, oh, it's this great game. It's called Warhammer 40,000. It's in the 41st millennium. He's telling me all about it, like, as quick as he can. And he said, it's a miniatures game. And he's like, you collect these little toy soldiers that are metal, and you have to buy them and collect them and put them together and paint them. And then you build a battlefield. And then, there's all these different factions and all this stuff. And then the teacher's like, obviously is like, hey, you guys are interrupting class. Go back to your desk, whatever. So I begrudgingly go back to my desk and I sit down, and I could not get my mind off this brief moment, whatever it was, like maybe a minute or, 30 seconds of what Andrew was telling me about this game, apparently. And I was immediately just hooked. I was immediately enamored. I could not think about anything else. Everything was a blur. So luckily, the rest of the day, like whenever we were going on recess or lunch or whatever, I was like, got right behind him. I was like, dude, you got to tell me more about this. So he starts telling me all about the lore, and, he knew all this stuff, right? Like, and Andrew was really more into the lore and the history, like, all that stuff, like the stories, more so than he was into the game, right? Like he liked the idea of it as a game, but he really liked the art and the stories. And Andrew's still kind of like that, actually, even though he is still a gamer today and he plays games. He really likes the aesthetics and the stories, and he's a writer too, so that makes sense. And actually, that probably was a big inspiration for him, being a writer, I think. And so he's telling me all this stuff, and I was like, man, this is awesome. Like I got to get into this, and he's telling me how to get into it, and we're like building an army on like notebook paper, and at recess and doing all this stuff, and we're actually like trying to. I remember actually like trying to play it on like notebook paper, and we did, we were just making up this little game. Because we saw there was a battle report in either that one, or maybe he had a white dwarf with him too. And when I saw a battle report, I was like, well, we can just play this like on a piece of notebook paper. So I just drew out, like it was a battle report, and we were like, I just made up some shit, right? We were just making up some rules. And then of course the other kids in the class became enamored with what we were doing too. They're like, oh, whoa, what's this? And all of a sudden we had all these other kids that were interested too. Now, one of the other kids in class within a short time frame, I'm not sure, whether it was like a day, a couple days, a week or whatever, it was like, that's pretty cool. I got something cool. I'll bring to school tomorrow, too, if you don't mind. And we were like, yeah, totally. He's like, yeah, it's really cool. I think it's a game. I'm not really sure. So the next day he comes into class and he brings this exact book. This was the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Monsters Manual. And this also rocked my world, right? And so I was like, whoa, this is really awesome too, And so I was like, yeah, it's obviously a game. I don't know how it's played. I was like, I didn't understand any of the information in this book, but I could tell that there was statistics in here and all this stuff and information. And I was like, hey, can I borrow this? And he's like, yeah. And so again, I just made up rules for this game. And I remember actually like writing out a whole game based on just this monstrous manual. And I think I called it Castle Wars or something, and actually wrote like a whole book and drew pictures, stapled it together. And we were basically playing a role-playing game without really knowing the rules of a role-playing game. We weren't really playing D&D because we didn't know there were like other books and stuff. Nobody had the other books. And at the same time, Andrew tells me about this other game that him and his brother are into called Battletech. And he's telling me all about this game, Battletech. So I got into all this stuff all at the same time, so I got into miniature games, role-playing games, even card games like Magic the Gathering. It was another one that he like told me about. And, so it kind of all happened at the same time. Well, me and Andrew started hanging out a lot, and I started going over to his house, specifically his grandmother's house. His parents were divorced, and he spent a lot of time at his grandmother's. So I would go over there on the weekends, and we would hang out, and and his older brother was actually a gamer, right? And his older brother was probably 2 or 3 years older than us. So at that time, he would have been like 12 or 13, and he was actually old enough to actually understand, how to play these games, and was actively playing them. And he actually had like, a Warhammer army, a Warhammer fantasy army, and he had Battletech miniatures, and he had role-playing games, and he had all that stuff. And so I was really fascinated, because Andrew liked to talk about it a lot, but Joe, his brother, actually played it. And so I became kind of friends with Joe too, which was kind of a story of my whole life. I always was hanging out with the older guys. I would hang out with guys my own age, but I also like was really into whatever the older guys were doing. Still am, it seems. And so, Joe and me would hang out occasionally, and he would show me like his Warhammer fantasy army, and he had like this fully painted Beastman army, which is, thinking back on it, he was 12 or 13 years old, and he had this fully painted Beastman army, and it was well painted. Like I still have some of his miniatures hanging around. I can't find them. And they're pretty good, like there's not, like they're pretty good for the time. And for like a 12-year-old, I was like, these are pretty well painted. He was actually like a really good painter, and probably the best I had seen, up until, I got to like high school. I was like, I thought that he was like the best painter I had seen up to that point, other than what you saw like in White Dwarf or whatever. Right. And so me and Andrew would hang out, and I would try to get Andrew to play some games with me. And we did play some games, mainly role-playing games. And we played stuff like, Shadowrun. We played this, and I got that book. Another role-playing game I got, which I don't think Andrew played this with me, but the twins across the street that I was talking about did, was like Indiana Jones. And we played the Star Wars role-playing game. So, I role-playing games were kind of like my early avenue, just because I couldn't afford as a kid to get a lot of miniatures, but I could afford to get like a role-playing game book. Right. Mm-hmm. But that didn't stop me from buying miniatures. Every once in a while I go to the store, and, I think the main place we would go is Hobbytown USA, which it was a big chain of hobby stores here in the US. And I'm not sure if they're still around or not. I think they're mainly all closed down. There might be a couple open, but there's none around here anymore. But that was the place, that was the closest place we could go. And they had a really big gaming section. They had like 2 whole aisles of, role-playing games and miniature games. And they had one whole aisle that was just dedicated to Games Workshop stuff, So, that's where we would go and buy our role-playing games and miniature games and all that stuff. And so, me and Andrew were playing games and stuff. And I think the real first war game we played was probably BattleTech, because that Christmas of 1996, well, I originally asked for the Warhammer 40,000 box set. And my mom's like, no, I don't know why. I guess she was like, you're maybe like a little too young for that or whatever. I don't really know, but she was just kind of like, yeah, well, we'll wait on that. What else do you want? And I said, well, maybe it's too expensive. I don't know. But I asked for, the BattleTech box set. That was the next best thing. So she got me the BattleTech starter box. I think it was the 4th edition, and it had just come out. And it came with 2 paper maps and a bunch of card standees, not any miniatures, which I kind of got gypped because the previous one actually came with all these plastic miniatures, right? But I didn't know the difference. So I didn't care. It was awesome. And the cool thing about BattleTech, well, even today, but especially back then, was that was a fully self-contained war game. I think that was probably the perfect war game for me to get into at the time, because you could get a lifetime of fun out of just that one box. You didn't need to get anything else. It had everything you needed, and it had tons of options in there, and you could expand outward. And we did eventually, but I had years of fun just out of that one box set. And so I would say BattleTech was actually the first proper war game that I bought and actually played. And I think it's actually kind of crazy, 10 years old, that I actually knew how to figure out how to play BattleTech. I think that just, and I heard this on one of your podcasts, actually. You were talking to somebody about, a lot of adults don't think kids are able to learn complex games or, able to retain rules like that. But I beg to differ, because I did. I was playing BattleTech and stuff at 10 years old. Now, we might have got some things wrong or whatever, but we were playing full games of BattleTech on a regular basis and having a good time. So anyways, so from the ages of 10 to 12, that's pretty much how it went. We did a lot of role playing, either one-on-one with me and Andrew, or maybe his brother. And occasionally Joe would, play Warhammer with me. He had some extra stuff, and we'd play. And actually, when I was the first Games Workshop big box set I got, I think it was my 11th birthday. This would have been 97. I got the Warhammer Fantasy 5th edition box set. The one there on your back wall is the one that was the first Games Workshop product that I got. Mm-hmm. And I remember going to get that with Andrew. We went to the store, and my mom's like, okay, that's what you want. So we went to Hobbytown, and she said, pick out what you want. And I think originally I wanted to get the Warhammer 40,000 box set, but they didn't have it. And then I was like, maybe we'll get Blood Bowl instead. And Andrew's like, I think Andrew talked me into getting the fantasy box set. I was like, okay, let's get fantasy. So I got the fantasy box set. Immediately we went home, and we went to the craft store first, actually. And I talked my mom into buying a piece of, just green felt that we could lay over the kitchen table. I was like, oh, we got to have a battlefield. And she's like, okay. So she takes us to the craft store. I'm like, I need a 4 foot by 6 foot, piece of, whatever. And so, we went to the craft store and got that. And then immediately we get home, and me and Andrew are hurriedly gluing together, all the miniatures so we can play a game of, Warhammer Fantasy. And I'm reading through the rules, trying to figure this game out. And I remember us trying to set it up by the end of the day, but I don't think we actually played a game that day. But we did eventually play a lot of games out of that box set. And that was a fantastic box set and a very, very good entry to the hobby. And it came with that little castle tower and the hut, and it came with basically everything you needed except for the magic system. But there were no magic users in the box set, so it was fine. And then eventually, I took that over to Andrew's place, and Joe was really keen on, I think me and Joe were playing, with his Beastmen and my, I used the Bretonnians, and we were playing some little games like that. And he had some Bretonnian miniatures, and he gave me some a few more figures to fill out my like Bretonians that he just bought just to paint. And he's like, well, I'm not going to use these. Here, you have them, and he gave me some more like Bretonians so I could fill out the Bretonians. And he's like, I really want those lizard men. And I really hate these beastmen because Joe would always lose every game he played. Like he just like, I remember him like coming home from the game store, and of course me and Andrew were like, how did it go? How did the game go? And he's like, I got my ass kicked, and it was terrible. Like I hate these beastmen, and so finally he's like, I really like these like lizard men. How about we make a trade for your lizard men for my beastmen? I'll trade you 1 for 1, which was an amazing deal because these were all most of them were metal figures, and I think he just wanted to get rid of them and wanted to try something new. So I traded him all the lizard men for an equivalent amount of beastmen. So now I had like a beastman army made up of partly metal, and some of them were like the monopose, like beastmen warriors with the halberds or whatever. But that was a killer trade, and that was my first. I think that was probably my first like metal Citadel models, and they were all painted too. He painted them all. So I played out of that fantasy box set for a while with Andrew, and I tried to talk the twins into playing occasionally, but for the most part, like nobody was real hot and heavy on fantasy. At being a kid that age, so it was kind of hard to find like people to really get into it. And so my interest in it didn't dwindle, but I just couldn't find anybody my age that was really that interested in playing. Like Andrew would play occasionally with me. Joe would play when he, had time or whatever, when he wasn't hanging out with, the cool kids. And, like the twins weren't really into it. They were more into the role-playing games. So by the time I got to 6th grade in middle school, I wasn't really actively like playing war games, but I was I wasn't really, I was role playing, but it was not real heavy. I didn't have like an organized group or anything. But that all changed when I got to middle school. So when I got to middle school, I met this kid. Well, you had 2 choices in middle school, right? You could be in the gym class, or you could join band. So band sounded much more appealing for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't feel like going to gym class and running laps every day. But the other reason is I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to play drums. And so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna take band. So I took band on the assumption that they could teach me to play drums. I don't know what I was thinking. So I get into band, and a short but funny story that's unrelated to gaming. Like, so I get into band, and they had like tryouts to join the percussion section for a bunch of 6th graders that never played anything, right? So this did, hindsight, I'm just like, what was this guy thinking? Why would you try out a bunch of like 12-year-olds, that had never played an instrument in their life? But anyways, we had tryouts. So I go in there, and he gives me a pair of drumsticks, and he's like, he plays a couple like, rudiments, and tells me, to follow along. So I'm like playing along, and he's like, stop. He stops me real quick. He's like, you'll never be a drummer. You just don't have it. He's like, go out there, pick out another instrument that you like, but you're not going to be a percussionist. So I go outside, and I look out in the band, and I'm like looking at all these instruments I really was not interested in. Like I wanted to play the drums. That's what I joined band for. So I'm like looking around, like sweeping the band class, and I see this really weird looking, twirly looking horn. It was a French horn, and there was only one kid that was playing it, another awkward, nerdy looking kid. And so I was like, well, he looks like my kind of people. And that looks really cool. And I'm like, I want to play that. And he's like, okay, yeah, that's a pretty hard instrument to play. But he's like, we only have one French horn. It'll be good to have another. So yeah, you can play the French horn. So I ended up playing French horn. Now, the funny part is I actually did become like a really good drummer and played professionally and all this stuff. And years later, I kind of got revenge on that guy. Like my brother, when he went to middle school, I sent him one of my demo tapes or one of my albums from one of my bands. It was like, hey, tell him your brother Cody sent you this, and just tell him I did actually become a drummer. So that's another story in a whole. But that guy admitted defeat in the end. He was like, oh yeah, tell your brother he was, he did really well, blah blah blah. So anyways, so I ended up playing the French horn, and I met this kid also called Andrew. different guy. And so me and this kid are talking or whatever, and for a couple of weeks, and of course, because we're bandmates and we're playing the same instruments, so we're always like communicating with each other. And within a couple of weeks, he brings in a D&D book to class, and I'm like, "Holy shit!" Like, you're into D&D? And he's like, "Yeah, I'm into D&D, and like, I play D&D, and we got a couple other kids to play D&D and stuff." He's like, "Hey, you should come. I'll see if you can come play. We got this group we play every Friday night. You should come hang out and play with us, but you got to be invited to come. Like you can't just show up, So anyways, so I'm like, okay, well, see what you can do or whatever. So the kid that ran the group was named Dustin, and Dustin was older than all the rest of us. He was in the 8th grade and we were in the 6th grade. And so Dustin was like, I've been talking about all these people like they're the worst dorks of all, but Dustin was really was the icing on the cake. I mean, he looked like that nerd from the John Hughes films with the curly hair. You know what I'm talking about? Like he looked just like that kid. And he had this like bomber jacket that he wore every day, and he never put on deodorant, so he smelled terrible. And he had these huge like 1980s, like 20 years out of date, glasses, and just the whole deal. The only thing he was missing was like the pocket protector, So I had seen this kid around, so I knew of him, but I didn't know him. And so, a couple weeks go by, and I'm in computer class, and Andrew comes up to me, the other Andrew, and he's like, "Hey, I talked to Dustin, and he says, you can come play with us. Like, we need another player if you want to come. Like, we're going to play this afternoon." I'm like, "Yeah, totally." So I called up. Maybe I called my mom. I don't know if I did or not. I really don't know. I probably just took off, to be honest. I don't really know. But I will also say, I hadn't mentioned this up to this point. My parents were really not excited about me being into any of this stuff also. And that's really worth noting. I grew up in the South and was definitely a product, the satanic panic thing that was still going on strong here in the South in the 90s. So my parents were not thrilled at all with me being into D&D and Magic the Gathering and Battletech they didn't care about, but Warhammer, they were kind of like, it's okay. Like they didn't really understand it. My dad kind of understood it, but he's, so they weren't completely turned off by that, but they were also kind of like uneasy about it, with all the demons and chaos and stuff. But other than that, I was just like, "Oh yeah, look at these Imperial Guard and stuff." My dad's like, "All right, that's all right." So they were okay with that, but so they weren't really too hot on me, like playing D&D and stuff, but that didn't stop me. In fact, it probably just encouraged, when you're a teenager, young teenager, especially, and your parents tell you not to do something, you just want to do it more, and especially if it's something you're really interested in, right? You just become more enamored and interested in it. And I think that's actually part of the reason why I'm so obsessed with it today, because it was kind of this forbidden fruit. And so I took it all in. I took it as much as I could when I'm young. And now that I'm an adult, I can do what I want. So it's just like, I still as am passionate about it as I was when I was young, and probably more so now. I probably appreciate it more, maybe. Mm-hmm. So anyways, that afternoon, like I walk to Dustin's house, and it's like a few miles, the other it's across the main street on the other side of town that I'd never been to. And so I walk over there, and we go to Dustin's house, and we get there, and it was like the most stereotypical, D&D scene you could ever imagine. So we like go into his house. It's like this very 1970s, 80s kind of house. And we go down the stairs, and I can already hear like, there's like, clamoring going on down there. And there was this big old kitchen table, huge dining room table down there, and this massive basement that has like wood paneling, a giant like floor TV, like one of those old like wooden TVs, like on the floor. They had like a dartboard down there, a fridge, and it was like dark and kind of danky down there. And so I was, it was great for a bunch of teenage boys to go down there and have a place to hang out. And it was a big space too. You know, it was a big space, almost the size of the rest of the house. You know, so I get down there and introduce myself, and Dustin's like, "Hey, how's it going?" You know, and he was, Dustin was like, you know how to play D&D and stuff. I was like, yeah. And up to this point, I'd only played really a little bit of D&D. I didn't own any of the books. So I was kind of bullshitting my way through it. I really didn't know what I was talking about. And I was just kind of like trying to play catch up. And so needless to say, we started playing D&D. I started playing D&D with those guys, but we played a lot of role-playing games. We played, you know, D&D, AD&D, second edition. We played GURPS. We were playing Shadowrun, Vampire the Masquerade a little bit, even though like we were a little too young to understand the vampire thing. But we did play it a little bit. We played all kinds of stuff. And that group was great. But what happened is Dustin left middle school the next year and got to high school, and he started falling in with this like goth, like punk kind of crowd, and got a little too cool for us, right? I was still invited, by the way, which was interesting. I guess I was cool enough to hang out with the older high school goth kids or whatever. But he kind of like pushed the rest of the guys to the side. So I continued playing with Dustin for a little while, but I wanted to play with my other friends, you know, that I had made that were my age. And, you know, I had met a lot of other guys that were my age through that group. And so what happened is we kind of broke off from Dustin's group and made our own little group. And we started meeting at the other Andrew's house. And that was great because his mom did not give two shits about what we did there. You know, his mom just let us go crazy, which was good and bad, but you know, whatever. She's just like, all right, you boys have fun. And just like went to her room and we did whatever, you know, what the hell ever. So we had the run of the place, which is great. So we started doing that like every Friday night. And then one night I'm like, and I would spend the night there and I would walk home like Saturday or Sunday. You know, we'd play for like 2 days straight, not get any sleep. And then, you know, I would walk home Sunday morning with my dad yelling at me on the phone, telling me to come home and do chores and mow the lawn and all that stuff. And so, you know, but one night when I'm staying over there at Andrew's house, I'm like, I'm sleeping on the floor and he's sleeping in the bed. And I look up on his shelves and I see some miniatures up there and he's got some Space Marines. And I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, you're into Warhammer 40,000? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I didn't even know you knew what that is. I was like, yeah, totally, dude. I love Warhammer. And like, I've been looking for people to play with and stuff. And he's like, well, we should play some Warhammer 40,000. I'm like, heck yeah, we should. And so I was like, well, I'm going to start a Warhammer 40,000 army. Now, I forgot to mention too, that the other box set that I had bought when it came out was Gorka Morka. And we actually played that a lot. Because we played Gorka Morka a lot. And I still love Gorka Morka to this day. I know it's kind of like the redheaded stepchild of GW games, but I still have like a fond place for Gorka Morka. And the great thing about Gorka Morka for a bunch of young kids was you didn't need a lot of stuff to play. And the miniatures were cheap from what I remember. I think it was like 10 or 15 bucks for a box of orcs. And all you needed was like a toy truck and convert that and you're good to go. But I actually got the big box set and the twins would come over and Andrew would come over and his brother, and we'd all play Gorka Morka on my floor, you know, and I was kind of the game master, like, cause I had the rules and stuff. And we'd all play Gorka Morka. So through doing that, I had already collected a bunch of orcs. And also before that, my cousin had acquired something that I was seeking and never got. And I got the visual aid here, which was the Warhammer 40,000 second edition box set, which was like the holy grail of what I wanted and never could get. And so I told my cousin about this stuff. And he's just like, oh, yeah. He's like, I'm going to go get it. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to go buy it? And he's like, yeah, I've got money. I'm going to go buy it. And so I was kind of jealous about that. He actually went and bought the Warhammer 40,000 second edition box set before I got my hands on it. And he was real guarded about it, too. He didn't want me to like look at it or touch it or anything. But I remember when he got it, like he went into the other room and locked the door. It wouldn't let me in, and then finally he came out of the room and like opened the box and let me look at it and stuff. And I helped him put the miniatures together. And then eventually, he wasn't the smartest guy in the world. So he didn't really understand the rules. But I was like, well, let me borrow the rule book and I can figure it out. And he's like, okay. So I borrowed the rule book and actually figured out the rules, I guess, and went back. And so, when I'd go over to my cousin's house, we would play Warhammer 40,000 second edition out of the box set. And I did acquire a few more like orcs that Joe would give me. Joe was always giving me miniatures. He gave me some like mega knobs and, an orc war boss. And of course I had the Gorka Morka stuff. So I had like a sizable like orc army and the stuff that my cousin just gave me, like the orcs out of the box set. And he got some Space Marines. So me and my cousin were actually like playing second edition, I guess, before this a little bit. And on the floor, right, with no proper terrain. We would just have like boxes, and whatever, maybe some army men like terrain, like some of those like, plastic, sandbags and stuff, whatever we could scrounge up. It didn't really matter. And we would just lay it out on his floor and play 40K. We just play floor hammer, right? Mm-hmm. So fast forward back to middle school, Andrew tells me about these Space Marines and stuff. And I already had like all these orcs. But they were really poorly painted because, like most people, I think, when you get in, especially back then, I didn't know anything about priming miniatures, right? I didn't know what the right paints were, and I was using terrible paints. I don't remember what these paints were called. I think they were Armory paints. And Armory, I think, is still around, but these were really, the ones that I got back then were just, these were terrible. Like I can remember how bad these were. And on top of not having like proper brushes, I just had whatever cheap brushes I got from like the model store. And, didn't know how to prime miniatures. Right. And so like, this orc army I had was just like awful looking. Right. I eventually learned pretty quickly that I needed to prime the miniatures. I think I saw it in a White Dwarf. They showed you like, yeah, you need to prime your miniatures first and do all this. So I think I got a little bit better by the time I got to middle school. And so anyways, Andrew had these Space Marines. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to start a new army and I'm going to start some Imperial Guard. And so that, for my birthday that year when I was 12, my mother got me like an Imperial Guard boxed army. Like it was like the big box. You know what I mean? You remember those? Like they had the big like boxed armies, and she got me that, which was amazing. Right. Because that wasn't cheap. Yeah. And I put all that stuff together, and now I kind of had a little bit more knowledge about how to paint and like put stuff together and how to clean models. I had learned all this while, experimenting, buying random models and painting on the orcs and stuff. And so I had this pretty sizable, I don't know how, it was probably 1,000, 1,500 points of Imperial Guard or whatever. And we actually started playing, 40K third edition, because that's what came out. Now at the time, I really didn't care. I didn't see the difference because I was a kid, right? Like I think everybody else made a big fuss about it, but like at the time we didn't care. It was just 40K to us. And some kid at school had the rule book, and he had like bought the box set, and he didn't really care for it. And he heard me talking about it. He's like, "Hey, I got the rule book. If you want it, I'll just give it to you." I was like, "Okay." So he gave me the rule book, and this is the rule book that we played with back then. This is the exact book. So we started playing third edition because that's what was out. And I think that was probably actually a good thing for us being young teenagers. I think third edition was probably a good place to start because it was, even though I liked second edition better and probably still did back then, I think it was more easier and accessible for everybody else, right? So me and Andrew started playing, and Andrew was kind of a spoiled kid, right? His parents were divorced, but they would like fight for his love, and they would just buy him stuff, he was an only child too, and they would just give him stuff. And so he got whatever he wanted. So quickly he had this like huge Space Marine army, and his dad bought him. They went to a auction at the Games Workshop store, and they had a professionally made Games Workshop studio made table. He bought it. And so that was awesome. That was an awesome way to like really get properly introduced. And so we had this like awesome table, and we had all this awesome terrain. And the other thing he got was a fully painted, like studio painted metal Necron army, like the old Necrons. Like, so big money, right? And like his parents would just like get him whatever he wanted. So, but that was cool for me because we go over to his house and we stopped playing D&D and just started playing 40K all the time. And it was like every Friday night. I think the other guys kind of got pissed because we were like, no, man, we're playing 40K all night. Like you either get a 40K army or like we're, whatever. And we'd play D&D a little bit, but it was mainly like 40K was like what me and Andrew were all into, playing on this awesome board. And then the other guys started getting 40K armies. So like one guy had like, he got Dark Eldar and another guy got Space Marines. And I think another guy got Eldar. And so we had like 5 or 6 guys that would come over just about every Friday night. And we would play other stuff too. We'd play like Axis and Allies and D&D and whatever. But a lot of 40K, and me and Andrew were so obsessed with it. We'd even bring it to school and play like in the cafeteria and just set up like, trays and Coke bottles and play 40K like during lunch and stuff, like we were that obsessed with it, And so that was really like the time that I properly got into it, even though I got into it a few years earlier. Like this is like now I had seriously got into it. I found people that actually played it. I was actually like learned how to paint models. And also around this time, like I was just telling you, there was a Games Workshop store that opened. And that was the first Games Workshop store we had here in Nashville. And it opened in the big mall. There's a big like mall here. It's still there. And so we'd go up to the Games Workshop store all the time. And these guys really, really were great guys, right? Like they really took the time out of it took a lot of time to show us how to do things properly. They were like, yeah, like this is the kind of glue you need. This is how you glue together your models. They showed us how to clean the models, get rid of the mold lines. They showed us how to paint, like they were like, they would give us painting tips and stuff and we'd sit in there and paint and they let us play there. We could bring our models in there and it wasn't a big store, but they did have like 2 or 3 tables set up. And if it wasn't busy, you could bring your stuff in and play. So we go in there and play on their tables and stuff. And they were a really cool group of guys. And in fact, I'm still friends with one of the guys that worked there. And he works at another game store that I frequent. So that's kind of cool. So anyways, through middle school, we were playing 40K a lot, and fantasy, I couldn't really find nobody was interested in playing fantasy with me. And I will say that I was way more interested in fantasy than I was 40K always, but I just never could find anybody that really was as interested in it as I was. It was always 40K. So I just, 40K was cool to me too. It still is, but like fantasy was always, especially back then, was really what got me going. But I just couldn't find anybody that wanted to play it. So during middle school, we would just play 40K. And then by the time I got to high school, all those guys that I was playing with went to a totally different school than me. We got totally split up. I was the only one out of that group that went to a totally different high school because I lived on the other side of the street, the other side of the tracks, if you will. And they lived on the other side. And they went to a totally different high school than me. So we totally lost contact. And that group broke apart. Now, that didn't stop me from gaming. I was still role-playing with the twins. And I had a few other people that we played with and stuff. But I've met a whole nother group of guys. And they were much older than me. They were all seniors when I was a freshman in high school. And one day I was in the cafeteria and I was running D&D. And that's what, if in high school, if there was like a free moment, we were playing games of some sort, right? Like whether it was Magic or maybe some kind of miniature game or D&D or whatever, board game or whatever, we were always playing games. And so during like some kind of, it was kind of like it wasn't like lunch or anything. It was some kind of pep rally or something. And we never went to the pep rallies. We went to the cafeteria, and it's like, all the misfit kids would go there instead of going to the pep rally. So it was like all the heavy metal kids and the punk rockers and the stoners and, the gamer kids and the nerds and all that. So we're in there playing D&D, and there's another group of guys right behind us playing D&D. So I was like, holy shit, anytime you see a gamer, I was just like, hey, what's up? And one of the guys knew me, because he was older than us, but he played with us in middle school because he lived right down the street from Andrew, and he recognized me, and he's like, "Oh, hey, what's up, man? I hadn't seen you in a while." I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" I'm like, and he's like, "Yeah, have you met all these guys?" I'm like, "No, I haven't." He's like, "Hey, this is Cody. Cody's a really cool dude. I've gamed with him a lot." Like, and he introduced me to everybody, and he's like, "You should come over and game with us." And just like that, everybody's like, "Yeah, come game with us." So I started going and gaming with these guys, and they were all like 3 years older than me, which was that's a big difference when you're like 15 and they're like 18, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were, that's a really different mindset, and just that's a big leap in years when you're that age. So I matured really quickly hanging out with these older guys. So I started gaming with those guys, and it was mainly role-playing games. And we would, every weekend, it'd be like Friday night, they'd come pick me up, and we would spend all weekend. Again, it was just like middle school. We'd spend all weekend gaming, and they dropped me off Sunday evening, and that was that, and that's how it was. Like, I mean, it was like nonstop too.
Wow.
We hardly slept. It was just a smorgasbord of, pizza, Taco Bell, Mountain Dew, occasionally alcohol, maybe some weed, because we are, teenagers, and a lot of like role-playing games. And none of those guys were into war games really. And so the wargaming kind of fell off for a little bit until my sophomore year. There was a game store that opened, a new game store that I heard about that opened like in this really seedy district of close to downtown Nashville, not quite there. But it was in a weird location. It was like in an industrial area. Like you could not even like see it off the road. And we just heard about it. And, like hearing, like anytime there was there weren't that many game stores around here. So if like a game store opens, it like spread like wildfire. Hey, there's a new game store that opened. So we go up there to this new game store. And to this day, it's still my favorite game store I've ever been into. And it was called the Jolly Roger. And it quickly became our hangout spot. And the guy that owned the Jolly Roger was this guy that was named Jay. And Jay was he was probably in his late 20s, maybe 30. I don't really know how old he was. He wasn't, he wasn't much older than like 30. And me and Jay quickly hit it off and became really good friends. And again, I always got along with the older guys.
Yeah.
But the one thing about Jay was he loved Warhammer, and he had an amazing collection of Warhammer armies. Like he had probably, I don't even know, just about every army for 40K in fantasy. And in his store, he had, these incredible tables and all this terrain. He was really into Warhammer, And so there was a big group there that was playing Warhammer 40K and fantasy. I was like, oh shit, I really want to get involved in this. And by that time I actually had a job. I had my first job and started working. So I had some money now. And Jay was like, yeah, he taught me how to, he was like, well, if you ever want to play, just come up here. You can use one of my armies and just play. And he would do that. Like he was like, what army you want? You want Imperial Guard, Space Marines, and so me and him started playing fantasy all the time. And I started playing fantasy with all the guys up there, just using Jay's armies. And eventually what happened is Jay just sold me his Chaos Dwarf army. And he had this fully painted, old school Chaos Dwarf army with orcs and everything. And he sold it to me for like dirt cheap. Maybe the whole thing, it was like $300, which is even then was a steal, And so I would go up there just about every weekend and play Warhammer Fantasy with these guys. And that was great. It was a blast. And then we played 40K too. And then we played, some more, going through high school, I played fantasy and 40K. And then towards the end of high school, it kind of dropped off because in all this time being a teenager, I started playing drums and I got really good. And I started playing in bands, and music kind of took over the gaming. I still loved gaming, did not lose interest in it, but that kind of took over the gaming. And by the time I was 17, especially 18, that was way more important to me. So it was literally sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of took over the gaming. I still did it, but it was kind of like secondary to that. So by the time I got out of high school, that was really dominating my life because I was playing in bands and, making some money doing it, meeting girls and, doing drugs and all that stuff and just having the time of my life, right? Like it was great. But by the time I got to my 20s, I kind of like burned myself out. That the music thing really didn't. I realized, the music thing's not going anywhere, like especially in Nashville. I mean, Nashville, Tennessee, they don't call it Music City for nothing, right? Every other person plays guitar here. So it's like it's a very competitive scene here. And I'm not a competitive person, to be honest with you. So like it just did. I just kind of got tired of trying to compete with everybody else. And I still play music to this day, but I just do it for myself and fun and, whatever. But I realized I needed like a real job, right? Music was not going to be like a viable career really. So my dad's like, why don't you come work with me? And I was like, all right. So I did. And he's like, hey, you're really good at this. Why don't you go to trade school for a year and kind of get, learned up and I can pay you more. And you just come to work with me full time. So I did. So I went to trade school and used up all the money I had saved. And luckily my grandmother had put aside some money for me for college or whatever. So I had some money and I went off to trade school for a year in St. Louis. Well, I was only really had enough money to I didn't have enough money to go like cruising around or buy anything or, I didn't have cable. I didn't have internet. I was in complete isolation. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't have enough money to even go to the game store, which was like 45 minutes away. So I spent a lot of time there just thinking, listening to music, playing music, and reading a lot of books. I read a lot of books during that, which I've always been a big reader, but when I didn't have anything else to do, I read a lot more. And I was also thinking about like, when I get back, I started, thinking a lot and I was like, I really want to get back into miniature gaming. I haven't done that in a while. I really want to get back into this. And so the next year when I got back home, I started working and actually was making decent money at the time and was single, right? So I had a lot more money to blow. And so I got back into miniature gaming. And I think initially I got back into, I didn't want to get back into Warhammer because I did try to get back into it when I was about 19 or so. And I had a really bad experience. I tried getting back into it and went up to the store and the guys there were just like completely unwelcoming. They did not I walked into the store and like nobody said hi to me. Nobody offered to play a game with me. Nobody introduced themselves. And when I asked people, they're just like, yeah, it was not a welcoming experience. So I was like, you know what? F Warhammer, F these guys. I'm just never going to play Warhammer again. That really turned me off of Warhammer dealing with those guys. So I started looking at other miniature games. And I think the miniature game I kind of settled on was Malifaux actually at the time.
Oh.
Yeah, because it just looked different. I thought I was like, well, I liked some of the miniatures looked really cool. I liked the card mechanic. That sounded really cool. And also what was appealing about it was I could actually play it on a small space. And I was like, well, and the other thing is I was like, well, I could buy like a bunch of little of these war bands and maybe that way I could talk people into playing it with me. So I did. I bought all this Malifaux stuff. And so I tried, talking people into playing it and nobody was interested except for my brother. I haven't mentioned my brother in this whole story, but my brother actually grew up with me and I forced him to play games all the time. And still do actually, I still call him up. I'm like, hey, you want to play a game? And he's like, yeah, so my brother's kind of a gamer too. He's not as into it as I am, but he's always been a gamer a little bit by force. I kind of press ganged him into playing. So my brother played with me, but other than that, I couldn't talk anybody into playing. And then I used to frequent this comic store all the time. And the owner of the comic store was like, hey, I'm going to start carrying, you're into miniatures and stuff, right? I was like, yeah. He said, well, I'm going to start carrying Warhammer stuff. And one of the guys here is going to run a league here. And we're going to do Warhammer Fantasy and we're going to do Warhammer 40,000. He's like, maybe you'll be interested in that. And I'm like, and I was like, well, maybe. He's like, well, it's all new players, so it's none of these guys have played Warhammer before. So it'd be like a new crowd. And that's kind of that was really appealing to me, because I'm like, oh yeah, like a fresh group that doesn't have any preconceptions. And, it's basically like building a new community. And that sounded really appealing to me. So I agreed. I was like, yeah, that sounds really cool. So initially I bought up all this Warhammer Fantasy stuff, because he told me like there's going to be Warhammer Fantasy. And I show up to the first meeting and nobody's playing Warhammer Fantasy. Everybody's playing 40K. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to start a 40K army. So I started a 40K army. I kept the fantasy stuff.
Yeah.
So it was a really good group, actually. And we played for quite a few years. And even though I didn't really enjoy the rules as much, but I did enjoy painting the miniatures and hanging out and all that stuff. But it was around that time, and this is like, we're talking about like 2010 is when I got back into it. And around that time, I was playing for a few years, and we all of a sudden it started to get really competitive, and everybody started going to tournaments. And I got really caught up in that too, and did well too, I must say. Like I did do good, like in the tournament scene and stuff, but it got to the point I just got sick of it and realized I wasn't having fun. And I would come home every day with like a splitting headache. And I was like, okay, I got to do something else. And so meanwhile, my friend Andrew, the original Andrew from way back in the day, me and him still, we played in bands together and whatever, but we kind of had a falling out in our 20s. And he started coming back around again. And one day he comes over to my place. He's like, hey man, I was just in the neighborhood. I just wanted to drop by, see what you're doing. I was like, yeah, come in. So we're like having a beer and hanging out. And he goes to my like back room. And that's where I had all my war game stuff. And it was insane at that time. I just had like, I was buying everything. Right. So I just had like all these armies everywhere. And he's like, what the hell, dude? He's like, you got back into this stuff? I'm like, yeah. He's like, man, this is really cool. And he starts looking at the miniatures. He's like, I remember this and blah, blah, blah. He's like, I was like, well, we should play some games. And he's like, totally, man. Yeah, totally. So we start playing with the current rules, which I think were like 5th edition at the time. And we play like one game and he's like, this sucks. He's like, this is terrible, dude. He's like, this is nothing like I remember it. I was like, yeah, what do you mean? And he's like, you remember like we used to play, like, you remember all the crazy shit back in the day, like the shock attack gun and vehicles going out of control, and like what happened to all that? And I'm like, I don't know. I was like, he's like, we should play, the old version we played. I was like, yeah, you're right, we should. And so I started like looking around and kind of thinking about it, and I found the 2nd edition Battle Bible. So I printed that whole thing off, got it all bound up. I printed off all the tokens and the templates and all that stuff. And we started playing 2nd edition, and just kind of like, I left 5th edition in the dirt or whatever it was at the time. And we just started playing 2nd edition, and everybody thought we were insane for doing this too. We'd go up to the store. They'd be like, what are you guys playing? We're like, we're playing 2nd edition 40K. And everybody's like, why would you play? Everybody was just so blown away that we were going back to this old game. And we just like, that's all we did. We just played 2nd edition 40K. And we stopped playing at the store, and we just ended up going to his house every weekend. I'd go over there on Friday, and we'd drink a lot, and we'd play 40K 2nd edition. And we talked a couple of our other friends into trying it out, and it became like a regular thing. So I guess that's kind of my origin story, like, a nutshell leading up to this point, and what's led me up to where I am now. So I know I've talked a lot, and this has been a pretty long-winded thing, but maybe you got some questions, or other people do. I don't know.
Cody, yeah, you got a
do I know?
Hang on, mate. A bit of. Let me just check this again.
Yeah, a bit of audio reverb there. I think it should be okay now. But yeah, mate, you've got a very extensive history into the miniature wargaming and playing side of it, and then on your channel you sort of go and talk about that. Yeah, feedback. That's right, Carnifex. And it's really interesting. I really enjoyed your video, and you talked a little bit more extensively about parts of your story there as well, which I found very interesting. And like you, I love a good origin story, and everyone's got something different.
Yeah,
even come through into the same sort of pathway, usually through Games Workshop, but we all have a different way of entering the hobby, and we all and I think a lot of us, and talking about most people here, we've come from sort of isolated regional areas of the world, and somehow we've found it.
Yeah.
Just by chance, it's just come across it, like you with your friend at school, with him flipping through a White Dwarf or a catalog or something. For me, it was like, through HeroQuest, then discovering my local comic store, and then opening up all this big world of games of Games Workshop that I'd never seen before. And we all have our own sort of entry point into the hobby. And then if you're lucky enough, it sticks with you, and you keep carrying on, and your adventure grows through the people you meet and the games you play. So that's pretty awesome, mate. So you have a good break. Let's go through the comments, mate. So you have a good smoke and a drink, and we'll have a look to see what the guys are saying here, because we had a few people coming in, and thank you everybody who's joined us. So we've got Chris is here, and also we've got Cameron. They are two great guys on our Discord, and doing our Man of War. And Chris does a lot of other stuff. 2nd edition 40k. He does Necromunda, Blood Bowl, maybe. I think Space Hulk. We did Space Hulk, like remote players on our Discord channel.
Yeah, right on.
So it's good to see Cameron here. Sci-Fi is still awake and is still with us, which is amazing. I don't know what time it is there in the UK, and it must be like 3 a.m. or something. So he says it might have been White Dwarf 182, mate. He checked on Google. Maybe that's what your childhood friend in.
It's very possible. It was definitely one of the catalogs that I initially saw.
Yeah.
But Andrew did have, him and his brother had a subscription to White Dwarf.
Right.
And so I did some digging, because on your Discord, I noticed you had like a thing that said, your first White Dwarf. And it got me thinking about what my first White Dwarf was. So I ended up going and looking at like the White Dwarfs from that period. And I think I figured out which one it was, which I can't remember off the top of my head what issue it was, but it's the one with the Space Marine chaplain on the front. That's the cover of Angels of Death.
Yeah.
The Angels of Death Codex. And that was definitely the first White Dwarf I saw. I specifically remember that because right around that time, Andrew brought the catalog. He brought a White Dwarf, and that's the first one. He let me look through, and we're like reading through it. And I definitely remember like the battle report in there, and like the Andy Chambers interview. And Andy Chambers was like my guy back then.
Well, you'd be very happy to know, Cody, he just joined our Discord.
I saw that. Yeah, that's really cool.
Elected himself, and Adrian Wood's there. So now you guys can interact with them and ask some questions and send your love and praise to them for all these years of great gaming memories and in the hobby. So it's really wonderful that they accepted our invitation to join us there and interact with you guys, which is even brilliant. More is better. I hope to get them on a live stream like this, so you guys can interact with them in real time.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah.
Thanks again, Sci-Fi, for checking that up, mate. So that's awesome. Okay. Cameron said I couldn't have figured out BattleTech at 18 years old. I don't think I could have figured it out either. Yeah. So Cody, you're just, you just had the right mind. You're just wired into gaming, I think, at a very young age.
Well, there was another part of that story about like, I think one of the reasons I memorized, and I'm still pretty good at rules today, but I was really good as a kid because I couldn't get any of the books. Like I said, I was kind of forbidden from getting the books. And there's a funny little story about that, especially with the D&D stuff. I would have my mom drop me off at the bookstore, and I would go in there with notebook and pen and actually like copy the D&D rule books in a notebook by hand or memorize everything. So at one point I remember being a teenager and like, I literally had that whole rule book like memorized.
Wow.
Like it was amazing. I don't know. I would just sit there and be like, oh yeah, magic missile, it does this and this and this. And I can't do it anymore. But back then I had like all that stuff, like just memorized. So I think that really helped me in my early years. And also with Warhammer too, I didn't have a lot of the books, and I just kind of memorized all that stuff, So I quickly just learned and adapted to memorize rules, And of course, being young, I'm sure we weren't doing everything 100% correct.
Yeah.
But I do remember we were actually, me and my cousin playing 40K, and like we were playing fantasy and stuff. we were playing pretty close to what it was supposed to be, you know, and you know, all that stuff. So yeah, I think I always had a pretty good knack with rules when I was young.
And also, I think I commented on this before, maybe on your channel or just talking together. But as you started talking about your earlier gaming history and walking to that kid's basement,
Yeah.
and then you got the older kid called Dustin. It's like, you know, the cast of Stranger Things, you know, and just playing all D&D. So I love that opening sequence of them playing. I think it's the very first episode of episode 1, series 1 of Stranger Things, where they're all sitting around the table playing Dungeons and Dragons. It brings back a lot of great memories, even though I was never a big role player.
Mhm.
But I did try Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition with friends then at that stage. They were really into like Dragonlance, and I think we sort of touched on that before as well. And I still have a lot of fond memories of the artwork from Jeff Easley, of that era.
Yeah, I got
really,
a
really good stuff.
Larry Elmore hanging out behind me there.
Yeah, Larry Elmore is another legend, isn't he? Yeah.
Signed by Larry, actually.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. And I've met Larry quite a few times. He's a really, really good dude.
Yeah.
He's a really nice guy. I actually drank whiskey with him one night. We were at Gen Con, and I'd met him earlier in the day and had one. Like every time I'd go there, I'd get a print signed. And so I got a print signed, and then later that evening we went like right by the convention center, and we were having a drink and eating a burger or whatever. And Larry Elmore was there at the bar. And I was like, shit, I'm going to go buy. If somebody told me, like, if you ever want to talk to Larry Elmore, buy him some whiskey and, you know, he'll talk to you. And so I went up to him. I was like, hey, how you doing, Larry? And like, he remembered me. He would say, hey, how you doing? You were that, you know, guy asking me, you know, because I was asking him a bunch of questions and stuff. I was like, you mind if I buy you a drink? And he's like, no. And so I bought him a whiskey, and we're sitting there drinking Jack Daniels for a very short time. It was just like 5 minutes or something, and just shooting the shit. And he's, if you ever meet Larry, he's a very, very like down to earth, very personal guy. And like everybody that wants to talk to him, he gives him his full attention as much as you want to, you know, interact with him. He's a really, really good dude. So yeah,
Awesome.
Larry's cool.
What a great opportunity, mate. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I love the artwork from the old D&D 2nd edition era, the books. Well, you know, that in that time and during the 90s, you know, they were pretty hot stuff. You know, the Dragonlance books were massive then, you know, the whole series, the entire saga. I don't know how many books, it was like 12 books, I think it spanned out to.
It's a lot now. Yeah. I mean, they just came out with some more recently.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's something I didn't really talk about, but like the art is really what grabbed me from the beginning. I've always been a big art guy. I still love art. And that's what grabbed me initially, was the art of all that stuff. And to me personally, you know, just my preference, I think the art of the 1990s in the games too, just the games in general, I think that was like the golden age of everything gaming, in my opinion. And I'm kind of lucky that I was at the tail end of it, but I still experienced it. And I think that was a great time to get into gaming. But it was the art that really got me first, you know, like that's what it just, I mean, every time I looked at one of those pieces, and still do, it just my mind would just go to all these places, you know. Modern art doesn't really do the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of great artists out there, don't get me wrong, and a lot of great art and stuff, but it just doesn't grab me the same as like a lot of that older 1980s and 90s art does. You know, it really drives my imagination crazy to this day. Like, it's just such good stuff, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think for me too, I can really appreciate the older style. Well, any traditional artist I can really appreciate, because digital art obviously has taken its role now in terms of the amount of stuff they can produce and how they can access it digitally, how they can send stuff and that kind of thing. I get it, but it's like, okay, I make a mistake, I can just erase that and do it again. You know what I mean? Like, digital art is kind of like, you sort of can erase things, you can import things. With traditional art, it's some guy, some man, some woman who's you know, using a paint palette with a brush and actually putting that onto a canvas. And if they make a mistake, they might have to just throw the whole thing out and start it again. You know what I mean? Like, there's an enormous amount of talent and experience poured into that canvas or piece of paper with it, whatever they're doing. Yeah.
Digital art definitely requires some skill. It's definitely art.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm not going to deny it. But the thing I like about hand-drawn art and hand-painted anything like that, handmade art, is it has character to it, right? Like
Yeah.
it brings out the personality deep inside that person. And so every piece of art, like I can tell you, like you show me a Larry Elmore, I can tell you Larry Elmore. You show me a Clyde Caldwell, I can tell you that's Clyde Caldwell. You show me John Blanche or Ian Miller or, all these guys or even all these great comic book artists. I'm a big comic book guy. And so, like you show me any of those guys, usually I'd be like, oh yeah, that's Larry Elmore. That's John Blanche. You can just tell like it has a personality to it that I think you can't really get. You can get it in digital art. And there's some guys that can do it. But I think the difference is those guys that can express it in digital art, they started with physical art, right? And they just translated it to digital art. So they're using the same principles, but you have a lot of younger guys that started with digital art. And so it's kind of the other way around, right? And they're learning to do everything in a very samey kind of way. And it's just kind of like, it all just kind of like passes over me, to be honest with you. Like I look at a piece of art and I'm just kind of like, it doesn't do anything for me because it doesn't have that unique character to it. It's kind of the same. And I've heard you talk about it with like hand sculpted miniatures, right? I really love, that's one reason I collect and love the old miniatures is I love the character. They're pieces of art too, and like, I love collecting those just to look at them. Like there's so much character and personality in them. And again, you can tell, like, if you've looked at enough miniatures, like, who the sculptor was, because there's certain like characteristics and things to, their character and their art really comes out in their miniature. So I still think that's the best way to do art. And I really, really appreciate, visual art of any sort. It's amazing to me actually that people can do that. I had a little bit of artistic skill, but never, that's one thing I wish I had more than any other like skill is to be an artist. Cause I just love it so much, and I never really had, the right like knack for it or whatever. I had a little bit, but I wasn't that great of an artist,
No, me too. I wish I could, I sort of did a bit of drawing when I was younger. And because my mother's an artist, my grandfather was an artist, and my father dabbled in art at school. He wanted to be like a graphic designer. My sister's now a full-time graphic designer and illustrator. So we've always had that in our family. I've really wanted to do like be an illustrator or at least a concept artist or something like that, but I just didn't put the time and skill. I was always into painting miniatures, but if I could trade it, I would. I think.
Yeah,
for sure. Trade all that skill and time I put into miniature painting into like graphic art or whatever, I think I would have done it. And because you're really sort of you like you say, you're putting your own signature into every piece you do, so that it becomes very identifiable. Okay, well you're like Paul Bonner. It's unmistakable when you see an orc, even when he does like humans. Things like Warzone and stuff like that. It's a very iconic way he portrays his characters and the style he draws in, paints in, and that kind of thing. It's just a Paul Bonner. That's a Paul Bonner. Like Mark Gibbons, another one, very distinctive style, and incredibly talented guy. And now he does a lot of digital stuff, which I get because he has to do that for sketches, or he's got to do that for the companies he works for. They just require that kind of level of, and it might be just easier for him to just sketch out a whole heap, a lot of concepts, send them off to the companies and say, yep, that's a go ahead. And maybe he does a cross between, laying out the illustration in black and white, then scanning it on the computer, and then doing all the digital art for color and that kind of thing afterwards. I can see there's a cross blend, and there's like a demand for that kind of stuff because of the amount of art they need these days. They just don't have the finances to say, hey, we love your paintings and we'll pay you for like 2 months just to finish one piece. It just doesn't happen these days anymore, which is a shame. All right, so let's go into the other comments. We've got Dan the Man, Dan Buman. Good to see you, Dan. I really love your Musty Wargamers live streams, either on
Dan for the Musty Wargamers.
Dan for Musty. Oh, good.
Absolutely,
okay,
I watch it regularly. Great stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I love their live streams with Rusty. Helicorex or what it was called, his channel. I forget now. He does a lot of BattleTech stuff, and yeah, he's a really nice guy. And there's Palmer in Canada, and they sort of share the hosting between the two of them every fortnight, and really enjoy their conversations and the topics they bring up every fortnight. So I'll leave if I don't leave a link, go and check out Musty Wargamers on Facebook or something, and you've got links there to check out what they're doing. Then let's see. Chris says, fellow middle school French horn player here. Well, there you go.
Cheers.
You're not alone there, mate. Okay. Brave of you to share that, Chris. Yes, I think he just did it for the chicks. Yeah. Okay. All
Hey,
right.
man,
So I hope you're successful there.
I'm not going to go into details, but in high school, those band chicks were crazy, man.
Okay.
What happened to band stays band. That's all I'll say.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. And Carnifex is here to join us. How you going, mate? All the way from Australia. What does sci-fi say? Sounds like a pub scene for the American Werewolf in London.
Great movie.
Totally. So, sci-fi, you still awake? It's amazing. You were playing old and inferior over new and improved, madness or enlightened. Yeah, well, like my name, Madman in Japan. It's that's exactly what we're doing. We're playing crazy old games from the 1990s, like Cody. And all of us, yeah, we might be mad, but we know what's good. That's the thing. You know, even people coming into the hobby nowadays, and I always find this very fascinating, like young people like yourself, Cody, who maybe didn't experience like Road Trader when it was out, but you went back and thought, shit, this is a good game. You know, I like what they did here. And in some ways, it's far more interesting or entertaining than, you know, the modern iterations of this game. So,
well, I got really interested in I've always been interested in history of anything. So if I get into something, I want to know everything about it. And that includes digging into the past. And so like with everything I got into, I wanted to know what came before. So like with D&D, I started playing other versions of D&D. I got into AD&D first edition and original D&D and played all those and collected those. And it was the same with every like game I played, and Warhammer was no exception. I didn't know about Rogue Trader until I got older. And when I got back into second edition, that was right around the time like the old hammer movement was starting. Like it wasn't really like kicked off properly yet, but it was starting to get going. Like I was starting to see like these blogs pop up and stuff. And I started seeing like stuff about Rogue Trader. And I was like, that's really interesting. And Andrew actually went and bought the Rogue Trader book. And so when we were playing second edition back then, we started playing Rogue Trader too. We got into that as well. And so like, yeah, I've always been really interested in the history of gaming as well. And like, I think not just from a historical perspective, I actually like to play those games. I think there's still merit in a lot of those old games. Like there's something to be had there. Like there's still good games and there's something to be had, right? Like I don't think just because a game's old, it's inferior or there's nothing to see there. Right. So yeah, I've always been into older games. That's nothing new to me. Right?
Ooh, that's good, mate. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Okay. What does sci-fi say if he's still awake? That was a tale that needed an old pub, fireplace and copious beers for the telling. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, it was, mate. It was good. Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, now, whoa, we've got some more things here. What have we got here? Robo-dogs here.
Yes, very much.
Right.
So I didn't mention it, but when I got back into gaming, I've always wanted to play historical games. Even when I was like first got into gaming, I remember going up to Hobbytown and seeing all these historical miniatures. And I was really in love with military history, even as a kid. And there was a group there that met at Hobbytown, USA, that actually played historical games. And they were playing like Fire and Fury and, what was the other one? Some World War II game and stuff. But there were these old guys. And I remember like they would be like, pushing me away, like, step away from the table, kid. Like, we don't want you, like they did not want some little kid hanging around their table or whatever. So, but when I got older and got back into gaming, I found out that there was I was very interested in getting into historical games, I just didn't know anybody that was interested in it. And I found a group here that had been here for 30 years and I didn't even know about it. And they met at the gaming store that I used to go to and still go to this day. And so I started gaming with those guys and still do. And it's a very old school historical war games club. So what I mean by that is they don't play in a game store anymore. They actually have an office building that one of the guys owns, and they play there every Tuesday night. They also play there on Saturdays. And basically they schedule out games. So one guy will be like, I'm running World War II this week, and his responsibility, he brings all the miniatures, he sets up all the terrain, and he referees the game for everybody, right? Like, so that's the way that club plays. So I definitely got involved in that. And I have several different historical armies. I have American Civil War in 3 different scales. I have Napoleonics. I have American Revolution. My favorite period is obviously like the 19th and 18th century. That's always been what fascinated me the most. So American Civil War, 7 Years' War, Napoleonic Wars, any of that stuff I really love, especially American Civil War, like that, because being in Tennessee, like I can literally drive 30 minutes and I'm on a Civil War battlefield, right? So I grew up around, American Civil War history all around me. So that's always really fascinated me. So that's my kind of thing for historical gaming. But I love all that stuff. So, I still regularly play historical games for sure. And I really like them. Yeah.
Oh, that's good, mate. That's great. Wow. You got an army in 3 different scales. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You're a real historical gamer. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
sure. I really
normal.
enjoy it.
Yeah. So my early years seems pretty boring compared to Cody. No drugs, sex, and rock and roll for Dan. It's just straight on the farm out of college, I think, for him, unfortunately. You got to learn to play the drums, mate. That's what it was. What do we got here? It's going to click on it? Yep. How about Board Games of Space Hulk or Warhammer Quest, Cody?
Yeah, I definitely dabbled in a lot of the specialist games. Like I said, I played a lot of Gorka Morka back when it first came out, but we also played Necromunda. I've dabbled in all those games. We played a little bit of Warhammer Quest. We played a little bit of Space Hulk. If somebody had it, we would play it throughout the years. Back in middle school, we played a lot of Hero Quest, actually, which was actually way after our time. Like I didn't, because I did not grow up when Hero Quest came out. But what happened is we found it at a garage sale, and we started playing that a lot and loved it. And then later on, we acquired Warhammer Quest, and we did play that occasionally too. But we kind of liked Hero Quest better for some reason. I think it was just a lot easier and more enjoyable and more accessible for everybody. But I loved Warhammer Quest. It's a great game. Space Hulk, I have played a little bit, like at conventions and stuff. Mordheim, I've played a lot of Mordheim. I played some Blood Bowl. I've got Blood Bowl there in the closet and some teams. So Epic, we played a little bit of Epic. War Master, so yeah, I've kind of dabbled with just a lot of the GW stuff. I haven't played everything, but I've at least dabbled in a lot of it, right?
Yep, good, mate. Okay, that's nice. Yeah, I think for me also, Hero Quest is just, I don't know, maybe it's not just nostalgia, but I think I just enjoyed it more than Warhammer Quest. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's just the simplicity of it, the system. Anybody can just get in there and start playing. Yeah. Warhammer Quest sort of brought these different layers, and it's still good. It's still nice, and it's got a lot of depth to it, a lot more than regular Hero Quest. But I like Advanced Hero Quest a lot more, I think, personally. But yeah.
Oh, do you? Yeah. I never played
Advanced Hero Quest. Yeah, I love it.
I've never played Advanced Hero Quest. I've always wanted to play it, and I've been watching you play it on your channel, and it's been really interesting. Yeah, I'd really like to give Advanced Hero Quest a try sometime, and I'd like to play some Warhammer Quest again too. I think that was probably my favorite like dungeon crawler game I ever played, and I didn't really get to play it a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I need to revisit Warhammer Quest at some point, and would like to play Advanced Hero Quest sometime.
Well, we should try asking Chris, because Chris has got the whole base game and everything, and I played it with him recently for the first time since 1995 or whenever it was it came out.
Yeah.
One thing I thought that I forgot about Warhammer Quest and what I liked about it the most was it's all driven by cards.
Right. Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
flip the card, that's what the next tile will be. You flip the card, that's
Mhm.
what the monster you encounter. Flip the card, this is what, and I love that randomness to it. And
Yeah,
it's
fantastic.
all AI driven, so it's
Yep.
like you can just play cooperatively, and that's an excellent feature about that game. So yeah, it's got its merits, and I think I'd like to try it more. And I like to play the Chaos Warrior in
Yeah.
Warhammer Quest. That sounds awesome. I never got to do that back in the day.
Yeah.
We were selling that at Games Workshop when I was working there. We were selling Warhammer Quest. That was that time when it was out.
Mhm.
And but I just didn't have people to play with. And when I started working with Games Workshop, we just didn't play games, and you were sort of just doing demos and stuff like that. But yeah, it's an untapped little gem there. I've heard a lot of. Then I started hanging out with older guys. I'm 10 years older than you, Cody, so we'll get along fine playing a remote game. There you go.
Heck yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm still hanging out with older guys. So, you know.
Hang out with me, mate. Hang out with me. I'm
Yeah,
ancient. Okay, so we've got Robodog. I know nothing about BattleTech. Do people still play it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, BattleTech's, I think, bigger than it's ever been. Like, it's had this huge resurgence, which is kind of pissed me off because when I got back into gaming, like in 2010, BattleTech was one of the things. Like, I was like, I want to play some BattleTech again, and I bought like all this BattleTech stuff, and nobody would play it with me. Right? Everybody's like, "Oh, BattleTech." Oh man, that game's like old and washed up. Like it's so difficult and ancient, and the models look stupid, and everything under the sun. Like nobody wanted to give it a try. And Andrew did play it with me, to give him credit, but he wasn't like that into it. And then all of a sudden they kind of rebooted it, like had these new plastic miniatures and stuff, and which was a great move, a smart move. They didn't really change the rules, which is something I do love about BattleTech. Like it's pretty much the exact same game it has been since whenever, like 1984 or whatever it came out. It's pretty much the same. But with the reboot, like, yeah, now it's like huge. Like people are like playing BattleTech left and right. Like it's crazy. And actually, I've been playing some BattleTech with. I have one friend here that will play like a lot of these old games with me that I game with regularly, and he's got a really nice setup for BattleTech, and we both have hundreds of mechs, and we play a lot of BattleTech too. So I still love BattleTech.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, that's good. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talking about it. Musty Gamers as well. They're talking about it. And then Tim last week, he talked about it. So it seems like there's either the old crowd coming back, or there's just a new crowd of people playing BattleTech. And yeah, seems very popular in Ireland. I don't know why, but there's a lot of Irish people who play it. Yeah, seems to be that way anyway. Maybe I'm wrong there, but it just seems they've got like actual dedicated groups of people playing the game, and like organized play and stuff like that. So Dan says, in iterates, yes, Rubber BattleTech is still very popular. So because I know that Rusty on his channel, he does a lot of BattleTech stuff there. Yeah, it seems to be a big resurgence in BattleTech. I think they re-released the simplified rule set also. But I think the plastic miniatures that Cody was alluding to too, and I think Tim showed me, they're all sort of those kind of horrible PVC things, which is sad to see. But I'm sure you can buy maybe the metal ones somewhere.
You can still get them.
You can still get a lot about that stuff. But I don't really know much about BattleTech, to be honest. But seems almost slightly interesting. Cody, how do you have the time to be into all these things? Do you not have a phone? Exactly. Throw away your bloody cell phone, smartphone. That's really distracting.
Yeah, I don't really spend a lot of time on the phone, but I don't know, man. Like I'm a busy guy. I've always liked to keep busy.
Yeah, me too, mate.
I have, my dad's always laughing at me because he's like, "What are you doing tonight?" Because he knows I'm going to be doing something.
You're drinking?
Right?
You're drinking with the boys down the pub?
No. I mean, I'm always busy working on something. Like I'm very active, whether that's like making music or painting miniatures or playing a game or doing YouTube. Like I just like to keep busy. I don't really like sitting around watching TV and all that stuff. Like I like to keep busy and keep active. But I really don't know. I really don't have time to do everything, and that it does become a kind of a problem, So I kind of have to. I literally have to make like a schedule now because I have so many things going on. But it's fine. I like it. I like keeping busy, and I like that I have plenty of hobbies to keep my mind occupied.
Yep, that's a good mate, isn't it? It's a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm like you, mate, too. Like, I'll just go nuts if I don't have things to do. I've got to keep my hands busy. I've got to do something. Otherwise,
Exactly.
yeah, I'll do something silly like drink a lot of alcohol or something, probably.
Yeah,
Or
me too.
Go out and get a real life. I'll have to catch the rest tomorrow, but it's very late now. I must sleep. Yeah, sci-fi, you better get to sleep, mate, because I think it's like 4 o'clock in the morning there or something like that now. Warhammer Quest is unforgiving. Yeah, much like Advanced Hero Quest, very unforgiving game. Hero Quest had a bit more forgiveness, I think, but yeah, both of those game systems were, you're going to die. Like if you saw my Warhammer Advanced Hero Quest adventures leading all the way to the final, then you would know why. You would see. The evidence was there. Remote AHQ, let's do it. Yeah, I'm more than happy to do it for you guys. We get a party together. Let's do it. We'll do it on Discord or something. I would love to do that. We'll have to work out a quest. I might do something on orcs or something. Orcs and goblins use my Hero Quest miniatures in there and just do some kind of dungeon like that. Maybe you guys can design it, or we get to people vote on, or get someone to write a little quest prelogue or something to it, or prelude, I should say, and then we'll sort of form something around there. That'd be quite cool. And surprised that Josh was a big Infinity player in the past. How about you, Cody?
Yeah, I definitely dabbled in Infinity at one point when me and Andrew were regularly playing games about 10 years ago or so. We started playing a lot of other stuff, and I still do. I like playing a lot of other games or trying things out. And at that time, we definitely were trying out different stuff, and we played Infinity for a while, and we really enjoyed it when we were just playing, me and him. And then we started going up to the shop and playing it because there was a big group that was playing it actively. And I got really turned off by it because for one thing, there were way too many. I don't mind complexity at all, but there was a lot of like little bitty special rules all over the place. It was kind of a mess and hard to keep up with. And the other thing, it was just way too competitive. I'm not really that much into like the competitive like tournament scene anymore. And around here, our local scene with it, I don't know if Infinity is still a thing here anymore, but at that time, like everybody was just, all they were worried about was playing like tournament competitive games with Infinity. And so I was really turned off by that. And we just kind of stopped playing it. The other thing I didn't like was the miniatures are beautiful, but they were a pain in the dick to put together.
Yeah.
They were a real pain in the ass to put together. And I did not enjoy putting those things together, nor did I really enjoy painting them. They're not really that fun to paint for me. So
I hope I never see another fucking Infinity miniature ever again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I really mean that. I've done my thumbs and my fingers still hurt when I talk about it because the pain I put my fingers through, the tips of my fingers, putting those things together, cleaning them up, and then pinning them into these really tiny little, they were just so small to drill into the arms and that kind of thing, to pin them on their bodies. Oh mate, it was just hell. And then I had to cut the tabs off, drill into the feet, and then pin them into resin bases and stuff like that. Yeah, never again. And but it was fun while it was there, and I still love the guy who designed all the Aleph models early on, Juan Navarro, I think his name is.
Yep.
Brilliant guy. Yeah, brilliant stuff he did. Amazing. Of course, now it's all 3D digital sculpting, and I got to say, for the start, one of the guys who does it, I think is it Jag? J-A-G. I think he's another Spanish sculptor, but amazing stuff that he's done with 3D sculpting. I mean, he's really, really talented. But yeah, I mean, it seems to have dropped off a lot. Even Australia was massive into Infinity, but then it's just all died out.
Yeah.
And people have just gone on to other things. So it's a shame because it's a good company. I really like Carlos. I like CB as a company. The people behind it are really good guys. But I think their game for me, and I think with Cody too, like he talked about 40K, where he came back with migraines and it was just horrible. Like I just need to get out of this. That's why I changed from Infinity to doing the older stuff, because it was like simple, fun, and we laughed. That was
Right,
the thing
exactly.
about Infinity. You
Yeah.
never laughed at all. It
No.
was so serious. It
So-
was everything was on that one dice roll. Like I
Yeah.
think I talked to you about it. Like I needed 19 or less on a D20. I rolled 20. Fuck, and I just like threw the bloody dice. It became so intense.
Yeah.
I thought,
Yeah.
no, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. I've got to step away and do something else, and maybe come back to it. I just never did, because I went into like 5th edition, and it was like, no, or 4th edition or whatever it is. And I said, no, sorry, not doing that. I'd rather play like 2nd edition 40k and never go anywhere else out of that. It's just in one big sandbox. You got all the rules, you got all the add-ons and stuff like that. That's it. I'm happy. It's all contained. That's the thing. Now, the other thing I want to talk about with you, Cody, because we talked about this before on our paint and chat, was that you also played Warhammer Renaissance or Renaissance.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I've always loved Warhammer Fantasy. And what happened is I found this guy, which is Jack, the guy that I mentioned earlier, the guy that I play with now. Now, Andrew moved away across country several years ago, so I don't get to game with Andrew anymore. But I met Jack several years ago when I first started getting back into gaming, and he jumped in our 40K group, and the guys there treated him like shit, And so, like, I really do not like that. If there's a new guy that wants to get into the group or gaming or whatever, I treat him with hospitality. I'm like, hey, how you doing, man? I'm Cody. Like, you want to play a game? And instead, like, this guy like plays a game with him and just like tables him in one turns, like, see you later, dude. Like, and I'm just like, dude, that's no way to treat like the new guy, right? Like, so I saw Jack over there playing this game with, I was playing 40K and he's over there playing with this other guy, and this guy just wipes him out in like 2 turns, and Jack's like packing up his stuff. And I was like, hey man, I'll play a game with you. I'm Cody. What's up? Like introduce myself. And so we got to know each other, and really cool dude. Like Jack is probably, one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Just a really nice guy. And we share a lot of like the same sensibilities. Like we love, we just love to play games, and we're not like super competitive. I mean, we play to win, but whatever. So anyways, when me and Jack started playing 40K, I learned that he played fantasy. I'm like, oh shit, you play fantasy? Like, I have a fantasy army and nobody will play with me. So we started playing fantasy. And at the time it was 8th edition. So we started playing 8th edition a lot. Like I just stopped playing 40K pretty much, except for 2nd edition, and we were playing fantasy. And every week I'd get together with Jack and we'd play fantasy. And then I realized I didn't really, well, okay. So what happened is we went to a tournament like a couple years later. And this is the first time I had played 8th edition with other people. And playing with Jack was okay. Like we had fun because Jack's a good guy and it was all in the spirit of fun. But we went to this tournament and I realized like that was like the worst experience I had ever had in my life. It was horrible. Besides the fact that like there was a lot of beer there and like, that was fun and everything, and got to play some Warhammer. I realized that 8th edition as a game was complete garbage. Everybody had the same kind of army. Like every army looked the same. The guys that were playing it were complete dickheads. Nobody was, and so the first day I was like in last place in the tournament, and it was a 2-day tournament. And I'd already, it was in another state. It was in Alabama. So I go to this tournament. I'm in last place. The beer kind of helped to make the day a little bit better. Yeah. So the second day I come back and the tournament organizer was looking, lining up the games. And he's like, oh, you're Cody, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, man, I'm really shocked that you came back today. I was like, well, I mean, like I paid to play and, I'm here to play some like Warhammer Fantasy. I don't care, man. Like, I don't care if I win or lose. He's like, he personally was like, hey man, like I'm really, really impressed that you came back. That shows great sportsmanship. And like, that's awesome that there was a lot of people that just dropped out like the second day.
Oh,
like
really?
Yeah. Because, they were there to win or whatever. And like, I was like play games. And he's like, dude, that's really awesome. You showed back up and like played and everything. He's like, good on you, dude. Like, pat me on the back. He's like, go have fun. And actually, that second day was awesome because it was all the people that had lost the previous day.
Yeah.
And so we, nobody gave a shit, right? We're just like getting drunk because there was like, they had like kegs of beer there. It was like $10 and you could drink all the beer you wanted. So we're like drinking beer and having shots under the table and just having a blast while all the guys that are winning are up there like at the front, like super serious and like, trying to win for what? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I mean, what are they going to win? Like, $50 a beer. Yeah. I mean, like, so we're just having fun. We're having a blast. But that tournament made me realize I really didn't like 8th edition fantasy. And Jack kind of came away the same way. He was like, he got his ass kicked too, by the way. And he was kind of like, we both kind of came back and like, this game really isn't that great. And I was like, we should like try out some of the older versions of Warhammer Fantasy. Would you be into that? And he's like, yeah, I think I could, get behind that. So I started looking at, like, I played 5th edition back in the day. I played 6th edition. I didn't play 7th at all. I don't know anything about it. From what I hear, it's just like 6th. So I was kind of looking around what the best version of fantasy is. And a lot of the older guys were telling me, hey, you need to look at 3rd edition. Like, that was like, I think you would really like it. And I was like, okay. So my girlfriend at the time bought me, and I still have it, she bought me the 3rd edition fantasy hardback rule book and the Armies book for my birthday one year.
Wow, nice.
She saw I was looking at it, and she surprised me with it. And that was a great like birthday present, So me and Jack started playing 3rd edition fantasy, and 3rd edition fantasy is a blast. Like, I love it, but it is crazy.
Oh yeah.
It's insane. Like, it's insane. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and we were both like, this is fun. This is really fun as hell. But like, maybe we should look at something different. So we started looking at other like systems. I started buying other like games and stuff. And then I found Warhammer Renaissance. And I was like, man, I think it had just like come out like on Facebook. And like, I was like, this looks really cool. Because it was kind of like Warhammer 4th edition with a little bit of like modern alterations, tiny modern alterations, but it still had that old school Warhammer fantasy feel. I was like, this is exactly what I want. So we started playing Warhammer Renaissance, and we were playing that a lot right before COVID happened. And of course, COVID happened and kind of like killed everything. But yeah, I played a lot of Warhammer Renaissance. I haven't played it recently. But I've been really itching to get back into fantasy. And I think when we do get back into it, that's what we're going to play. That's become my favorite version of fantasy now, for sure. I really like it.
Cheers, mate. I think it's 12:30. 12:40. I think it qualifies me to have my first drink of the day.
Ah, there you go.
So cheers to you, mate. So thanks again for joining with us. And yeah, I think Warhammer Renaissance is part of our group too. We play it all the time. We used to, I got the guys into 5th edition. 4th edition would have been a massive stretch. 3rd edition, almost impossible. Renaissance basically bridges that gap, I think so. Between the older, newer gamers, older miniatures, newer miniatures, older profiles, new profiles, and it sort of just merges everything in together. So everyone can play. Everyone has something familiar to them, whatever edition they played, and everyone enjoys it, has fun. And yeah, you still get the crazy 4th edition magic, which is awesome.
Yeah, right.
And I really enjoy playing. I think it's even though I love 4th edition, love all the books and everything, but Renaissance means we're playing the game. Because if I was like stubborn and said, oh no, I'm not playing anything, I'm only playing like 4th and 5th edition, I would never play a game. Yeah. You know what I mean? So Renaissance is kind of like, it's the savior that we just needed that just to get people on getting the miniatures on the table and actually throwing some dice and having fun. And it's an awesome set. Like, it's a living rule book. So it's all for free. Just download everything off the Facebook page. You're in. That's
the other thing I really like about it is I don't. As much as I like collecting the old stuff, it's gotten more expensive over the years, and that makes it really great that we can just go download the rule book every year and the Army book, and they have like an extensive Army list. Like more extensive than they did in like 4th and 5th edition. So yeah, I really love it. It's definitely will be my go-to for Warhammer Fantasy from now on, for sure. I still like, if somebody told me, hey, let's play Warhammer 5th or 4th or whatever, I would be all about it.
Me too.
For
Yeah.
sure. But I think, my go-to for now on is going to be Warhammer Renaissance.
Yeah, I still need the nostalgia kick of picking up the 4th edition books and reading through them, flipping through them. I love all that. But I can see why Renaissance is a positive move, because basically, like Nick has done, Nick here in Japan, he's worked with Boulder. Boulder's the guy who created the set, and worked with him in order to check all the spell descriptions, make sure they're all free of any kind of ambiguity, just making sure everything looks really clear, so that some people can say, well, it doesn't really matter, we can just roll a 4+ whatever, and that's fine too, but you want something that's really streamlined, so when someone comes into the game fresh, they can read everything and everything makes sense, everything is clear, the terminology is right, and then there's no sort of well, what do we do here, or whatever, those kind of moments, because Warhammer is a system where a lot of that comes up. More so than any other game I've ever played. There's a lot of like, okay, what these two interactions overlap each other, or they clash. What takes precedence? What happens here in this situation? So the more clarity, the more feedback they get, the more input they get into the game, the better it's just going to be for everybody. So that's awesome. That's great you're playing it, man, because it surprised me when you said, oh yeah, I'll play Warhammer Renaissance. I'm like, wow, really? Awesome. That's good. Yeah.
No, we haven't played it since before the pandemic. But I would like to jump back into fantasy. Now, unfortunately, I don't really have an intact fantasy army right now. My chaos army is in kind of pieces, and I do have a 3rd edition era orc army that needs to be painted, and a 3rd edition era wood elf army that needs to be painted. Yeah. But I tell you what I really want to do is I want to rebuild that chaos dwarf army.
Yeah.
That's like the one regret I have in life is selling my chaos dwarves. But with all the new 3D sculpts, I think that's going to be like probably not my next project, but it's going to be in line for this year is to do chaos dwarves. I think I want to do that. And then we maybe play some fantasy. Yeah.
Cool, man. Yeah.
Then, hopefully we can rope in some more people. I do know some more old fantasy enthusiasts around here. And they're all playing Kings of War right now, which I have no interest in. But I think I could convince a couple of those guys to play some fantasy again. I'd be like, hey, we're playing fantasy. Like, check this out. Like Warhammer Renaissance. I think I could probably convince a few more people when we get something going.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think once they see you playing it, and that's the thing about Warhammer Renaissance, if they see you playing it, they've got more inclination to actually invest their time in building an army, painting it, and start playing it again. You know what I mean? If you just talk about it and say, yeah, let's play that, and then it sort of just drifts off and no one does anything about it. So like in our situation, like tomorrow I'm going to go down to Cashua to play it with the guys. And we have, we did have about, I think 10 regulars,
That's awesome.
which is awesome. Which is amazing for like Japan. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's
tomorrow we've got 9 people. I'm trying to get another guy coming down tomorrow if he can to play. So we're sort of losing people. We lost Justin. Unfortunately, he moved away because of work to Hong Kong. But now we've got another guy coming in. We've got 2 other guys coming in who are over in Japan traveling, and they wanted to play in the tournament as well. Like, it's not really a tournament. It's like a games day kind of thing. Yeah. But it's good to see there's some kind of growth. There's some kind of stimulus there that people say, hey, these guys are actually playing, every couple of months they're having some kind of games day and having a piss up afterwards. Let's go and play, Yeah. And it's just fun. It's really welcoming. It's like, you haven't played Warhammer Renaissance? Don't worry. It's not a tournament. Come in. Let's get your miniatures on the table. You'll pick it up in no time. Yeah. And you'll be laughing and, having a beer as you play. And, it's just a good atmosphere. It's nothing like a tournament. Because when you say the words tournament, it's this PTSD, like, oh my God, no, like you had that experience, like, oh no thanks, I'm not going to go to that. It's not like that at all. We do record the points, but it doesn't mean the end all thing. It's like, it's just for fun,
The best, I tell you, like, so I used to play a lot of tournaments back in the day, and the best tournament I used to go to, they don't do it anymore, which is really unfortunate. It used to, what was that tournament called? It was called like the WA or something, and they played it in Alabama. And it was invite only. You had to get invited.
Right.
And it was in a bar. They rented out a bar for a day and had a 40K tournament there. And it was a blast because, like, if you came with like a power army list, you were not invited back the next year. It was
Cool.
all about getting drunk and having a good time. And it was so much fun because like the scenario, they'd have a different scenario every game, and it'd be like this wacky, crazy thing. And everything involved drinking. So if you captured an objective, it'd be a shot glass, and you had to buy your opponent a shot, right? So
Brilliant.
everybody would just get wasted and just have a good time. And that was the best tournament I'd ever been to. And it's kind of a shame that it's not around anymore. But that guy had a good idea. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that gives me good ideas actually how we can do ours. Like even if it's just like not a tournament, like just us playing kind of thing. Like, yeah, you complete this objective or something like that. Yeah, you get a shot of whatever. I think that's a really fun idea. Because like I think you Cody would agree with me, and I think a lot of the guys here would agree with me too. With the limited time we have, and that limited time we're going to have to choose between all those games that we want to play. When we get to the table, we want to have a good time. It's part of the enjoyment of the social aspect. It's the game itself. And it's like, when I get together with my friends, I know I'm just going to get guaranteed a good time because I know the guys, we have fun. There's no competitive kind of ego in there. It's just, and we play, to win. Of course, you play to win because the winning feeling is nice. But if the way you do it, I think is a big part of the game. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, and we've all come across various different types of people in our wargaming hobby that we probably never want to see ever again.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But you stick with the guys that who are real human beings and really like to play for fun and like you say, have a few drinks, have a bit of fun, and enjoy the game for what it is. But narrative gaming is a big thing now. Narrative gaming is really popular now. And I like that. I like the aspect of narrative gaming because it's not just like it's a pitch battle, very symmetrical. It's kind of like you're thrown in the situation and here's the background. And like Road Trader does that very well. It portrays a story very well. And it can really throw you a real big curveball and you just need to work your way through it. But it's really entertaining at the same time. So I think those kind of scenarios are like really, really popular now, I think, with gamers.
Yeah, I've always been into narrative gaming, and I think that's because I hung out with my friend Andrew, and he's a narrative guy. He was a writer, and he had that mind. So even when we were kids playing games, he'd be like, "What's the story here?" We got to, and he'd come up with this elaborate story and background and stuff. So I've always been into that. And the other thing that reinforced that for me is the historical guys, because when you play, I play there's two types of historical games. There's the competitive historical games, and there's scenario-based historical games, right? And I like the scenario-based, where you're either playing a historical battle or you're playing something based off history. It may be a made-up battle, but it's based off of history, right? It's based, and so you have a referee that comes up with these objectives and all that stuff, and so that kind of reinforced it for me too. So I love narrative gaming. And I love having a narrative to the games. And I'm pretty lucky in that the people I usually play with enjoy that kind of stuff too. I mean, I'm fine with just be like, okay, we're playing 1,500 points. All right, bring your army and we're going to set up terrain. I'm fine with that too. That's all great and all. But I really like having that narrative. And I like continuing that narrative too, because, you play the game and you can see the narrative unfolding in front of you as you're playing. And that's one thing about the older game rules too, is they kind of encourage that narrative, right? Rogue Traders, 2nd edition 40K, old versions of Fantasy 4th and 5th edition really have a lot of narrative built into the game. So as you're playing the game mechanics themselves encourage that narrative to play out in front of you. And you see it all kind of playing out and you're imagining this thing happening, for real. It's not like playing 40K now where it's just very, very abstract, right? It's a lot more granular. And I really like that. That's one thing I really like about those older rule sets is that I get really immersed. Especially with Rogue Trader recently. I've been revisiting Rogue Trader, and me and Jack have actually been playing Rogue Trader. And I was like, okay, we're going to play this because he's never played Rogue Trader. And I was like, okay, the spirit of this game is it's a narrative experience. So I'm going to let you like set up the terrain. You come up with the scenario. He provided the miniatures, and he was kind of the GM, but we were both playing. And so he set up this whole scenario and everything. And like we started playing, and like it was just we played 2 games like that the past few weeks, and it was just like some of it was amazing, like how immersive that was. Like the story just really like unfolded, and like we were like, well, what are we going to do like in the next game? We're already like creating a campaign based on these just impromptu like narrative games. And I think those older games really, really enforce that and encourage that, not just in their style, but in the rules themselves, just because of how the rules interact with the game. Like they really encourage a narrative style, and it just unfolds naturally, whether you want it or not. Right. Because all this wacky shit is happening in front of you, and it's like a movie playing out, or like a comic book or whatever, so it's, I'm really into that. And I love that. And I think that's a big part of wargaming for me, is the immersion. Like it is. Yeah. Right. I love that,
But I'm sure some people out there will say, well, Josh, your favorite game is Epic Space Marine, and it's not narrative at all. And that's true. It's not. It has no narrative inbuilt whatsoever. It's purely a tactical game. But I love it because of that. I love the hidden deployment setup. It's all fog war stuff. I know where the objective's laid out, and there's no sort of random element to it so much.
Right.
But apart if you play orcs, there are some sort of random rolls you got to roll for the Mad Boys, which are just hilarious. Every time they get shot, you got to roll 2 dice and see what happens to them. They might play dead, or they might run off, or they might just go completely Rambo on the enemy and something like that. So it's got some fun random elements into there. But the straight Epic Space Marine is just very kind of straight cut. Yeah. There's no sort of there's not many charts you need to roll on, that kind of thing. Whereas Rogue Trader it's built for randomness.
For sure.
Just your creation of your army, like the orcs. I don't have much experience with the whole system, but for the orcs itself, you're basically saying, okay, I want to play this particular clan. This is the limitations or prerequisites, and from there it's all random. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it, I think. And the name generation is random. The weapons are random. And then you sort of just got to build your army around that. And I think the Nigel Stillman philosophy of wargaming really is built around that kind of thing, where you create an army and it's fixed. That's it. That is your 1,500 point Rogue Trader Orc army, for example. And then you just play that forever. I think that's a real beautiful thing. But if it's a thing of its time, and but I think it's nice that people like us are sort of revisiting those things that we missed out maybe of our past, but we're sort of rediscovering them now.
Well, I will say, like, you were talking about like Epic not being a narrative game rules wise, but you already come from that narrative mind space, so you can play any rule set. And if you're in that narrative mind space, like the rules don't have to enforce that to create a narrative.
Yeah.
So, so I think, that you already have that narrative unfolding in front of you, because you grew up with that narrative experience of playing a lot of these older games. And that's still how I approach any game, whatever we're playing. Like, it doesn't matter what I think also it kind of, for me, a lot of that probably comes from the role-playing experience too, because I've always been a heavy role player and still am. And so I kind of want to role play too. When, when I'm wargaming, I'm like, I am this orc war boss, or this Harlequin, whatever, Grand Harlequin or whatever, so like, and then come up with a name for the guy, and like start thinking about like what his background is and stuff, and like really putting myself in the headspace of that. And, but I like that. Like it's an escape, and it's really cool. Rogue Trader, it's been really interesting to revisit that game. I will say, I'll be honest, I don't think it's the greatest rule set, like rule set wise. I think second edition is a better rule set. But all the ideas in Rogue Trader, I think, are amazing. Yeah. Like all the aesthetics of it, all the wacky ideas and the free form expression of Rogue Trader is really, really cool. That's what I really enjoy about Rogue Trader. The rule set, I actually think, has a lot of flaws. It has, I'll be honest, like it has a lot of problems. I feel the same way with third edition fantasy. Like I love the same thing about third edition fantasy. It's got a lot of like the aesthetics are amazing. The art's amazing. The ideas in there are crazy cool. But as a rule set, it was better like in fourth edition, fifth edition. So what I think I'm probably going to do is take a lot of the ideas of Rogue Trader and interpret those in probably second edition and such, you know, like I think that's probably the way I'm going to approach it, because I have found playing Rogue Trader again, I'm like, there's a lot of rough edges in this rule set.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it's not a bad rule set. And for the time, it was great. Yeah. But I think like, you know, it definitely has some things that could be better. And I think second edition was better in my opinion. But you can still take those ideas and bring them into second edition. And in fact, if you look at a lot of those old battle reports and stuff, a lot of the, you know, the studio and stuff were still kind of doing that. They were still kind of playing in that narrative like style and stuff from the Rogue Trader days. And so I think Rogue Trader is a great inspiration is basically what I'm saying. You know, I think that's like the main like thing I love about Rogue Trader. I still would like to play more of it and like experiment with it. But overall, like as a game, I think second edition 40K is really like my sweet spot for 40K, you know?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there because I think the cards for second edition built the narrative around it. You got the mission cards. Yeah. You got the strategy cards, and it sort of tells a story within the game through the randomization of those cards. And I think I like that. I like that how it does that in second edition. So yeah, it's kind of like every edition has their kind of memorable parts or things they did better, and then you know you just find the edition that you want to play, or like you say, extract things that you want from an edition and sort of build it into that. And Rick Priestley, I think, said, I don't know who said it, but he said that he likes when people play the games, but he's sort of disappointed when they don't want to change it or they don't want to evolve it somehow, make it their own game. So I think even fourth edition, if you look in those books, he always comments or has some kind of commentary to say, you know, use these rules as a pure guideline, and please feel free to change it in any way you want to suit your play style. So if you take fourth edition fantasy, for example, but you like third edition aspects of third edition, you can sort of just import those into fourth edition and play it as your own sort of homebrew rules and that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it's very flexible. It's your own game. You know, make of it as you will. Because in those days, like Road Trader and that kind of thing, it wasn't a competitive game, and I think that's the beauty of those games. They were not designed for tournaments. They were not designed for competitive play, organized play. They were designed for you and your friends to create some kind of scenario, play out some kind of narrative, and enjoy that experience. And I think, Cody, you'll agree with me that those narrative experience games we play are the most memorable of all the games we've ever played. You know what I mean? Like that. Oh, absolutely. That time when someone set a scenario, and there are moments in games where you think, oh man, I'll never forget that. That's so cool what happened there, because it was just so against the odds, but I managed to overcome it. I rolled a 2 double 6 or things like that, which, you know, just stick in your mind forever. Yeah.
Exactly.
The campaign sets for 5th edition are a particular interest of me, because I didn't play those during the day, and I only did those when I came back to playing 5th edition Warhammer, and they are just beautiful, because what it really gives you is it sets the background for you. Each of the 4 game scenarios you play have some kind of consequence. So if you're the winner, like if you're the protagonist, and if you win the game, you'll have certain benefits. If you lose the game, you will lose certain benefits towards the end. For the final penultimate 3,000 point battle. I love how they put them together. I think the guys who wrote those, I think Nigel Stillman did some, I think Rick Priestley did some, Thomas Pirinen did a few as well, and I think they did it for the reason of creating a narrative thing where characters weren't the dominant thing. They had a name, they had some sort of special weapon or something like that, but everything apart from that was just your troops. There was nothing really special, you know. and they had all the maps laid out. They had like special rules for everything. Like the Grudge of Drong had drunken miners.
Yeah.
So like this really cool rule where they'd either either get drunk and throw up and do nothing for the turn, or that they would sort of charge forward in some kind of drunken rage. They had some really beautiful rules in there, and I think it was so. And those games are very memorable to me, playing those scenarios for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I remember the only one I actually bought one of those back in the day. Right after I bought the 5th edition box set, I bought the High Elf and Dark Elf one, which I can't remember the name of it. Yeah. I saw you and Paul played the first scenario of that. And originally, like me and Andrew were like, okay, I think I was going to play High Elves and he was going to play the Dark Elves. It never happened. We started buying a few models here and there, but it never panned out. But I did actually buy that like campaign. And I remember it was amazing. It was glorious. I never looked at the other ones. I never got it. I mean, I think I've looked at them nowadays, like PDFs and stuff, but I've never got to peruse really through the other ones. But yeah, those were really cool looking, really cool.
Yep, absolutely, mate. So they're really a gem. You can import other, like you can play Warhammer Renaissance with those campaigns easily.
Yeah.
You can put any kind of rule set in there. Carnifex says, got to agree with Cody. Tawny suck. Get together is way better. That's for sure. Man. I think we all agree there. And then my good mate Camillo. Damn, I missed this. Glad I got to pop in to say hello. We'll watch the full video afterwards. Good on you, Camillo. It's good to see you here, mate. In Australia.
Oh, is that Camilla, the Space Wolves guy?
Yeah,
man, I love that video.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. That was the first video I saw on your channel, was that video you played with him with the Space Wolves. And I loved him looking through all his Space Wolves and talking about like the history of his army. Yeah, he's a really cool dude.
Yeah, I've got to get Camilo on the live stream if he's up to it. If he wants to come on and talk about his history into gaming and stuff, it'd be really fun to do with him. So, Rubber Dog, I wish you had the chance to see Josh's Svarlaheimer, Winter Pano, and his Aleph, and his pre-sectorial Tunguska. He painted for Melbourne player. They're truly phenomenal. Thank you very much, mate. I did. Yeah, they were my first commissions. I did, and when I first did commissions in Australia, I did all Infinity stuff. So I did a big Toha one for my good friend Paul in Melbourne. And then, I sold my huge JSA army to another guy in Australia, which I kind of regret about that. I really like that army. But again, it's kind of like the opportunity was there. I needed the money. Same old story. Nothing's changed. Right. And then the Pano got sold as well. And, it's the story of my life, really. I paint and sell. That's my job. Paint, play, and sell. That's the paint, build, and play, whatever it is with Dave Taylor. It's the opposite. It's a paint, build, and sell. So yeah, mate. Yeah, I really enjoyed doing those. At the time, I loved Infinity. That was everything for me. Like that was the only game I ever played. The only miniatures I ever painted. I really enjoyed that time when I did it. And second edition, the artwork, the miniatures, the books were brilliant. Yeah. And third edition sort of detracted slightly because it went to digital artwork, digital sculpting, and that kind of thing. But I still see, I still keep looking at it, but I think it all looks very much the same now. Everything looks the same. Nothing looks distinctively different. And that's kind of the off-putting thing for me about it now. So hell yeah. Thank you, GM Cody. Nice.
Welcome,
good,
dude.
Absolutely keen to be part of the live stream to talk about narrative, army building, and converting. Well, let's do it, mate. We'll set you in for April, my favorite month of the year. And Camillo, you'll be on here, mate. And Cody's going to be chatting to you and asking you lots of questions, I'm sure. Okay. Well, Cody, we're over 2 hours, mate. Look, I don't want to keep you all night. I know you have your wife or partner there probably wanting to hang out with you or something like that. You probably want to go to the toilet, probably, or eat something or do something like that. Something you need to do apart from talking with me, mate. But look, it's been an awesome time, an awesome chance to catch up with you on the live stream, and that way, hopefully, people can see you and hear your story and know you better, and check out your channel, which is GM Cody. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I got a little YouTube channel, GM Cody. It's very low production. I do that on purpose.
Well, it's just like this. I was gonna say it's just like this.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
exactly like this. I just turn the camera on and I
It's
talk,
good. I like it.
and I just talk about old games I like. The one difference I would say that sets me apart from a lot of people is I go really in depth. So if I'm looking or reviewing at a game, I don't care how long it takes. I go through the whole book and look through the whole thing. I don't care about chasing the algorithm or all that stuff. Like I just do it for fun. I love talking about games. I love games. And I do a lot of role-playing stuff. I do some live plays on my channel, and I'm part of some other games too. I run games. I am the game master, right? GM Cody.
Yeah.
But I also play in some games with some other people. Just about every week, you'll see me either playing or running a game on my channel. But lately, obviously I'm a big war gamer too. So I've been wanting to do some more wargaming stuff on the channel. And I'm trying to expand out into that. So yeah, go check it out, GM Cody, and see if you like it or not.
Yeah, no, I like I said, I when I met you, and thanks for joining our Discord community, because that's how we met. You talked about your channel. I thought I'll go and check that out then, and I saw your videos. You reviewed Rogue Trader, the book. So basically, the PDF of Rogue Trader, which is really interesting. You go through all the parts of the actual book itself, the artwork, and how to construct armies, and the sort of philosophy behind Rogue Trader. I really like the first edition role play one you did, because I love that book. It's one of my books I've got when I was about 15 years old. It's awesome. So yeah, please go and check out Cody's channel. It's full of great stuff. It's got a lot of AD&D in there, AD&D second edition, other role playing supplements and books that Cody's really passionate about talking about. And mate, look, overall, I'm just really happy that you come on and we found each other, because I think we really clicked it off. Or hit it off when we first started talking. We like the same things, and it's just really nice that we got together, mate, and we can do this together, mate. So, cheers to you. I drank all my sake now.
Yeah, cheers, dude. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
Right.
I've been really having a lot of fun connecting with you guys on Discord, talking about all these old '90s GW games, because that's a huge passion of mine is '90s GW. So that hits all the stuff for me.
Awesome. Well, you got a new subscriber. Camilla's just subscribed to your channel.
Thanks, dude.
AD&D and also Vampire, which Vampire Masquerade. Yeah, so that's good. So go and check out Cody's channel. It's good stuff. I like how Cody presents it, and he just talks from the heart, which is what we want to see. Okay, buddy, well, you enjoy the rest of your evening. And I'm going to see my little Pokemon boy downstairs and see what he's up to.
All right. Sounds good, man.
Okay, brother. Take care, mate.
Peace.
See you, mate.